Chapter 1648. There were only two ways to maintain an alliance. One was through emotional ties, and the other was through benefits. Three World Island and the Mermaid Clan had both. Naturally, they were unbreakable. Of course, be it emotional ties or benefits, Lu Yi was at the center. Although Three World Island's foundation had not changed much, with a strong ally like the Mermaid Clan, their ability to protect themselves was not something Peerless Island could compare to. If there was really an enemy attack, the Three World Island could casually send out 5 Moon Jade advanced stage experts. As for the Star Constellation sect, there were 500 people from the Three World Island and close to 200 from the Mermaid Clan. There was a total of 700 people. Defending one spiritual island was not a big problem. This was also why Lu Yi could leave without worry. What happened at Peerless Island could be done once. He could not let his hard work to build up his foundation and spread his name, only to have it taken over by others. If that's the case, then there's no problem. Luan Xiao nodded. Since Lu Yi said that the Mermaid Clan was Three World Island's strongest ally, she did not have to worry about anything. Lu Yi took out an item and said, "Senior sister, keep this. This is the key to opening a path to the Mermaid Clan's territory." He was leaving Three World Island, so he could not bring the Azure Sea Conch with him. If he needed to borrow troops from the Mermaid Clan, he could only use the Azure Sea Conch to open a path. Therefore, he had to keep this item. Shui Yuan and Hua Ci were busy refining pills. Moreover, they were only at the early stage of the Constellation Islands. Lu Yi thought about it and decided to leave this conch with Luan Xiao. Luan Xiao was familiar with this Azure Sea Conch. She had seen Lu Yi blow this conch before and knew its use. Luan Xiao took it seriously and said, "Junior brother, don't worry. I will take good care of this item. When you return, I will definitely return it to you in one piece." Lu Yi chatted with Luan Xiao and Tang Jun for a while more before leaving. The situation at Three World Island had stabilized. Now that they had people and spiritual jades, they had them. The cultivators of Three World Island had to quickly raise their cultivation. Lu Yi could also leave without worry. After leaving the meeting hall, Lu Yi went to the alchemy room and chatted with his second senior sister and Hua Ci, who were busy refining pills. Knowing that he was leaving, Shui Yuan only warned him, "When you're outside, be careful. Don't get involved in things that you shouldn't. You also have to be wary of people you don't know. After all, you may know a person for a long time without understanding their true nature, especially when it comes to beautiful women." After nagging for a while, Shui Yuan suddenly burst into laughter. "Forget it. In terms of experience, you are more experienced than any of us. We can't treat you like a child. In short, come back safely." Lu Yi couldn't help but nod. In fact, it felt pretty good to be nagged like this. He looked at Hua Ci. "Do you have anything to say?" Hua Ci thought for a moment and looked at him meaningfully. "Don't be a womanizer. Am I that kind of person?" Lu Yi was filled with righteous indignation. "Hee hee." Hua Ci chuckled as she tossed the herbs into the pill gourd. Lu Yi didn't lose her temper. She took out an item and tossed it to Hua Ci. "Take this." Hua Ci took it and curiously looked at the ancient coin in her hand. She vaguely sensed something. "A rare treasure?" "You could say that." Lu Yi nodded. "How powerful can it be?" Hua Ci asked. The power of rare treasures were usually stronger. Lu Yi had given this item to her before he left, so it was obvious that he wanted her to have the ability to protect herself. Therefore, Hua Ci estimated that if she activated this coin with her own strength, she would be able to unleash the power of a late-stage constellation realm cultivator. "It's just SOSO against a Rizhao." Hua Ci's hand trembled. Shui Yuan also looked at him in shock, as if she wanted to see if he was joking from his expression. "I've verified it. When I came back from the lower reaches of the sea with Great Elder Yen Miao, we encountered a Rizhao star beast. We used this treasure to deal with it." Lu Yi immediately explained the situation at that time. Hua Ci finally understood. "So, this treasure coin has a restraining effect, but it doesn't have any killing power? No wonder its power was so terrifying that it could be effective against Rizhao." "That's right." Lu Yi nodded. "After you use it, throw it into the Wanxiang Sea and soak it for a while. its power will be restored. As for how to throw it into the Wanxiang Sea, that was simple. She just needed to find a fishing line and tie it up. Hua Xiai did not say a word and threw the treasure coin back. Take care of it yourself. I don't want to be a widow. She stopped before she could finish her sentence. Lu Yi looked at her with a smile. Widow what? Just take care of it. Hua Xiai did not continue the conversation. When Lu Yi went out, having a treasure coin like this to protect himself was a life-saving asset. How could he leave it here? Lu Yi grabbed her hand and slapped the treasure coin into her hand. I have other life-saving items. Moreover, this treasure coin can only be used to its fullest in the Wanxiang Sea. Otherwise, even if I carry it with me, it can only be used for one attack. It would be different in the Wanxiang Sea. After one attack, there would be another attack, and the attacks would be endless. How could there be so many spiritual jades for it to devour if he carried it with him? Hua Xiai clearly did not believe him. She only stared at him with a determined expression. Lu Yi had no choice but to slightly activate the red talisman's power. Hua Xiai was relieved. With a red talisman on him, he indeed had the ability to protect himself. I heard that when you were outside the Wushuang continent, you used a red talisman to kill Yu Yao. Where did you get these red talismans? Hua Xiai asked curiously. As far as she knew, only Ri Zhao, who was proficient in talismans, had a chance of refining red talismans. Back then, Lu Yi had just cultivated to the constellation realm and he already had a red talisman. It was very unreasonable. A senior gave it to me. I helped him a little. Lu Yi scratched his face. Hua Xiai looked at him for a while and suddenly smiled. I suddenly remembered something. Lu Yi, come with me. She slowly stood up and walked out. Lu Ye's heart skipped a beat. He hurriedly said, if there's anything, just say it here. You're treating me too much like an outsider. Get lost. Shui Yuan seemed to have realized something. She kicked Lu Yi and sent him flying. 3 days later, Lu Yi found Li Shang. Fellow Taoist, we can set off now. Li Shang looked at Lu Yi worriedly. I'm not in a hurry. Why don't you rest for a few days? You don't look too good. It's okay, it's okay. Lu Yi sniffed. It's not good to stay in a dangerous place. It's important that we leave quickly. You haven't been home for so long, your family must be worried. Li Shang was confused. But since Lu Yi was so insistent, she naturally wouldn't refuse. Moreover, she really wanted to go back to the ancestral land. Then I'll make some preparations. Fellow Taoist, please wait for a moment. Li Shang nodded and suddenly remembered something. About Yaya, I've already talked to Yaya. Let her stay here. With my second senior sister looking after her, it won't be a big problem. Before leaving, he naturally had to take care of things that needed to be taken care of. He didn't forget about Yaya. However, he couldn't bring Yaya with him this time, so he could only ask his second senior sister to look after her. Although Yaya herself was a little reluctant, she was still sensible. She just wanted Lu Yi to come back early. Lu Yi naturally agreed and said that he would bring her a lot of delicious fruits when he came back. That's good. Li Shang sighed. She wasn't going to say goodbye to Yaya, so as not to feel uncomfortable. Thinking about it, if they didn't see each other in the future, Yaya would slowly forget her. Li Shang went to prepare for departure. Lu Yi waited for a moment, only to see leisurely ride over on Hupo. Standing beside him, she tilted her head and looked at him with a smile. Lu Yi suddenly had a bad feeling. Frowning, he asked, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm going to the ancestral land of the Spiritas with Sister Li Shang." Nonsense. Lu Yi reprimanded with a straight face. "What are you going to do there? Be good and stay in the three-world island." When Li Shang said that she wanted to take Yi and Hu Po to the ancestral land of the Spiritas, Lu Yi didn't refuse. He just let her try it herself because he felt that Yi would definitely not agree. After all, the two of them had been separated for too long. It was rare for them to be together again, so how could Yi leave? Who would have thought that Yi would actually be persuaded by her? He didn't know what Li Shang said to her, but in any case, Li Shang and Yi had been inseparable recently. He said, "But Lu Yi, I'm part of the Spiritas. My previous cultivation path was wrong. Only by going to the ancestral land of the Spiritas can I find a suitable path for myself. The gap between her and Lu Ye's cultivation was getting bigger and bigger. If this continued, sooner or later, she wouldn't be able to help at all and would only become a burden. But if she cultivated the secret arts of the Spiritas, it would be different. At that time, even if there was still a gap between her cultivation and Lu Ye's, as long as she used the spirit possession technique, she would be able to provide great help to Lu Yi. She also had Hoopa. This was the natural sacred beast of the Spiritas. Only the Spiritas had a way to fully excavate Hoopa's potential. Lu Yi glared, but after hearing Yi's words, he didn't know how to persuade her. Suddenly, he somewhat understood his second senior sister's feelings before. She had always regarded Yi as a child, but in fact, Yi was no longer a child. She was also a constellation and also hoped to become stronger. Okay, just agree. Yi pulled Lu Ye's hand and shook it while acting spoiled. Also, big sister Li Shang will take good care of me. You don't have to worry. There's also Hoopa. Hoopa will be warmly welcomed there. With him, I won't be bullied. Lu Ye's face darkened and he didn't say a word. Yi moved her little head closer to him and looked at him with teary eyes. She said sweetly, Lu Yi, don't give me that. Lu Yi turned his head. When he heard that Yi wanted to go to the Spirita's ancestral land with Li Shang, he instinctively wanted to refuse. But then he thought about it. He was going to leave the three-world island. Was he going to let Yi stay here and wait for him? Just like when he left the 9 states, Yi had always been waiting for him in the 9 states. But whether it was the 9 states or the three-world island, they were all places he was familiar with. If he wanted to find Yi, he could find her at any time. The Spirita's ancestral land was different. He knew nothing about that place. If Yi went there, he couldn't find her even if he wanted to. But if he really did delay Yi's future because of this, how could he bear to do it? Lu Ye's heart was in turmoil. End of chapter. Chapter 1649. No matter what, you're not allowed to go. Lu Yi hardened his heart after thinking for a long time. He rarely spoke so harshly to Yi, but he couldn't care less this time. The ancestors of Immortal Origin City had no choice but to go to the Soul Race's ancestral land because they couldn't sleep in Immortal Origin City forever. Yi was different from them. Even if Li Shang took care of her, Li Shang was only a late-stage constellation realm cultivator. A place like the Soul Race's ancestral land had existed since time immemorial, and there were probably many experts there. If Yi was bullied, who would stand up for her? Furthermore, who could guarantee that the powerhouses of the Soul Clan would not have any devious thoughts towards Hoopa? The bond between Yi and Hoopa was not ordinary, and Hoopa treated Yi as his master. When the time came, if an innocent man got into trouble for possessing a jade ring, Li Shang alone would not be able to take care of Yi. Therefore, even if he felt sorry for Yi, Lu Yi didn't dare to let her go. It was nothing more than the Soul Race's cultivation path. When he became strong in the future, he would personally visit the Soul Race's ancestral land and find the right path for Yi. Yi puffed up her cheeks and looked at him angrily. I want to go. You're revolting. Lu Yi turned to look at Hoopa. Look after her and don't let her go anywhere. As long as Hoopa didn't leave Three-World Island, Yi couldn't leave. Hoopa shrunk his neck and stood to the side, looking away. Don't drag me into your quarrel. I'm just a tiger, I'm innocent. You're arbitrary. He felt wronged. Lu Yi turned around and gave her the back of her head. So be it if you want to act arbitrarily. Just this once. Not daring to look at Yi's expression, Lu Yi went to find his second senior sister and Shui Yuan. Li Shang didn't have much to prepare. A moment later, Li Shang entered Lu Ye's divine sea. Lu Yi summoned his star boat and flew out. Lu Yi didn't know how to go to the Soul Race's ancestral land, but Li Shang did. After some discussion, Lu Yi took out a star chart on the star boat and determined the direction. To reach the Soul Race's ancestral land, one had to pass through the insect path and enter a galaxy called Blue Moon. Lu Yi did not know much about the Tsangyue galaxy's foundation. After all, he had never come into contact with it before. However, he was only a constellation now. If he wanted to borrow the Tsangyue galaxy's path, it would not be a problem. It could even be said that if Lu Yi did not need to pass through the insect path guarded by Yu Yao, he would not need to greet anyone when entering Tsangyue galaxy. So what if Lu Yi came? Why would Blue Moon care? Of course, the premise was that Lu Yi didn't cause any trouble in Blue Moon Galaxy. After exiting the Wanxiang Sea, they flew towards the insect passage that connected to the Zhongyue Galaxy. However, the insect passage in the Zhongyue Galaxy was quite far from the Wanxiang Sea. Its location was also quite remote in the Wanxiang Galaxy, so it would still take some time. Along the way, it was quite peaceful. Lu Ye's speed wasn't very fast. Sitting on the star boat, he kept sighing and frowning, as if he were a parent who was worried about his disobedient child. Why are you doing this? You know you can't stop him. Li Shang's voice sounded. Lu Yi was very curious. What did you say to her? She's rarely this stubborn about anything. She would rather make herself unhappy than to stick to her original beliefs. Li Shang said, Don't you know the source of her stubbornness? Should I know? Li Shang laughed. I tried to persuade her to go to the ancestral land with me, but she never agreed until one day, she suddenly came to ask me about the soul possession technique and decided to go with me to the ancestral land. So she wants to go back, not because she wants to become stronger, but because she wants to be able to help you one day. Lu Yi fell silent. After a long time, he said, If she goes with you to the soul race's ancestral land, can you guarantee that she won't be bullied by your clansmen? That Hoopa won't be coveted by some of your clansmen? Li Shang said, There is competition everywhere, and the soul race's ancestral land is no exception. I can't guarantee that she will have a smooth journey in the soul race's ancestral land, but I can guarantee that she will be treated fairly. As for Hoopa, the soul race has always regarded the White Tiger clan as the holy beast. Anyone who dares to have thoughts that they shouldn't have will become the enemy of the entire clan. Li Shang spoke very sincerely. After interacting with her for a few years, Lu Yi naturally knew what kind of person she was. She wouldn't lie to him. But there were some things that he couldn't completely rest assured about. Li Shang said, It's unrealistic to expect Yi to grow up without any worries or pressure. Think about your own experience. You now have the strength to surpass the star constellation realm, but how many hardships and difficulties have you experienced? It was because he had experienced it that he didn't want the people close to him to go through it. In silence, Lu Yi suddenly turned his head and looked back, his eyes filled with cold, killing intent. You're courting death. The Wanxiang Sea had never been a peaceful place. Other than the airspace near the boundaries of the galaxy, conflicts and battles could break out anywhere else. Lu Yi had experienced this when he first came to the Wanxiang Sea. There were always some people in this world who liked to reap without sowing. They often wandered around the Wanxiang Galaxy in groups, looking for suitable targets to rob others to obtain their own cultivation resources. However, those who did this generally didn't have a good background. Because if they were from a big force, the force behind them would most likely have their own spiritual island, and they wouldn't run out to do this kind of thing. Yi hadn't been in the Wanxiang Sea for long, but she had interacted with Little Dumb, Crooked Teeth, and the others many times. She learned about the chaos in the Wanxiang Sea from them, but she really didn't expect that she would encounter such a thing on her first solo trip. She was dressed in white, and her petite figure was riding on Hoopo's back. She looked at the three figures that had surrounded her from all sides. There were 2 men and 1 woman, and their cultivation wasn't high. Judging from their spiritual power waves, the woman seemed to be in the late stage of constellation, while the 2 men were only in the middle stage of constellation. The man on the left had a ferocious expression. Little brat, hand over your storage ring if you want to live. As he spoke, he stared at the rings on Yi's hand. He glanced at him, and felt that this guy was very ugly. There were several crisscrossing scars on his face. However, although he looked fierce, Yi didn't panic at all, because she knew that there were people who wouldn't let her be bullied. Seeing her indifferent expression, the man instantly became angry. Little brat, didn't you hear what I said? The man on the right chuckled. Are you scared, silly? The woman with the highest cultivation had a cold expression, and she shouted in a low voice, Don't be long-winded, just do it. Don't hurt her mount. This white tiger looked extraordinary, and perhaps it could be sold for a good price. Since she gave the order, the 2 middle-stage constellation cultivators naturally obeyed. One of them brazenly pounced towards Yi, while the others surged with spiritual power. He raised his hand, and a ray of light from a spell technique shot towards Yi. This spell technique didn't have much damage, mainly for fear of hurting Hoopo. It only had a binding effect. Once Yi was bound, she would be a fish on the chopping board. Faced with such an attack, Yi didn't seem to react. She still sat upright on Hoopo's back, not moving at all. Even Hoopa didn't react at all. When the woman in the late-stage constellation realm saw this, she couldn't help but judge that this little girl probably hadn't seen much of the world and the dangers of the world. Otherwise, how could an early-stage constellation realm cultivator come to such a place alone? Her reaction was also so slow. However, at this moment, the woman's heart suddenly skipped a beat. An intense and domineering aura suddenly approached from afar. The woman turned her head abruptly, but she didn't even see who it was. She only saw a blood-red light suddenly stop in front of the little girl riding the white tiger. The binding spell in front of Yi was shattered by the blood-red light. Immediately after, a saber light flashed through the blood-red light. The middle-stage constellation realm cultivator who had just charged in front of Yi suddenly froze on the spot, maintaining his attacking posture. After a moment of silence, the blood-red light suddenly exploded. Wrapped in the thick blood-red light, a figure distorted in her vision, as if a peerless demon god had descended. Even though the aura emanating from the blood-red light was also at the late-stage constellation realm, the woman was suddenly frightened out of her wits, her heart trembling. It was hard to believe that a late-stage constellation realm cultivator could unleash such a terrifying might. "You guys are here. What is it?" From within the blood-red light came a voice as cold as ice, causing the woman and her other companion to involuntarily shiver. Only then did the two realize in horror that their companion who had pounced towards the little girl was already dead. His head flew into the sky along with a spurt of fresh blood. They didn't even see how their companion died. They couldn't fight him head-on. The late-stage constellation realm woman's sense of danger had never been so strong before. Without even thinking, she turned around to escape. However, before she could do anything, another saber light flashed in the blood-red light. The woman's expression changed drastically as she vaguely heard the roar of a beast. A bloody mouth with fangs seemed to appear in front of her, swallowing her in one gulp. Then, her consciousness fell silent. The middle-stage constellation realm cultivator who had used the binding spell was also swallowed along with her. Although the two people's cultivation was only SOSO, their backgrounds were obviously not good, and their foundations were not strong. The current Lu Yi did not need to expend too much effort to deal with such people. Behind the distorted figure wrapped in blood-red light, Yi, who was riding on Hoopa, curved her eyes into crescents. The little grievance in her heart had already vanished. She knew that Lu Yi would come to save her. She also knew that Lu Yi had always known that she was following behind him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have walked so slowly. What was this? He was so adamant about not letting her go to the soul race's ancestral land, but he was dragging his feet, giving her the possibility of following him. Yi immediately understood that Lu Ye's feelings were very conflicted. The thick blood-red light suddenly retracted, and Lu Yi sheathed his saber. He turned around and looked at Yi with a solemn expression. The moment Lu Yi looked over at Yi, who was clearly fearless and calm when she was blocked, her expression suddenly collapsed. She sobbed as she flew out from Hoopo's body and threw herself at Lu Yi with open arms, choking with sobs. "Wu, you scared me to death." End of chapter. Chapter 1650. The words of reprimand were at the tip of his tongue, but Lu Yi abruptly swallowed them back. With a soft and warm body in his arms, he could feel Yi's lingering fear and panic. He hurriedly patted Yi's shoulder. "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. It's all right now." Was so scary. Yi's sobbing grew louder, and her body trembled even more. Unfortunately, there were no tears in her eyes. After comforting her for a long time, Yi finally calmed down. At the side, Hoopo was licking his paws with a speechless look in his eyes. Yi was still curled up in Lu Ye's arms. Lu Yi grabbed her shoulder and straightened her in front of him. "Now you know how dangerous it is outside, right?" Yi wiped the non-existent tears from the corners of her eyes and nodded her head like a chick pecking at rice. "I know. Lu Yi wanted to tell her to go back obediently since she knew. After all, they hadn't left the 10,000 Elephant Sea for long. It wouldn't take him more than a few days to send Yi back. However, before he could say anything he said, "Don't worry, Lu Yi. I'll definitely follow you." As she spoke, she grabbed Lu Ye's arm with a smile, as if she wouldn't leave his side. The corners of Lu Ye's eyes twitched. Why did he feel like something was wrong? He already knew that Yi was following behind him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have walked so slowly. If he really wanted to get rid of Yi, he could just pick up his speed. Hoopa wouldn't be able to keep up with him. He thought that after experiencing this danger, Yi would change her mind. Who would have thought that this wasn't the case at all? However, Lu Yi looked at her in surprise and pulled his arm away from her. "You've grown up. Don't act like a child. I like it." Yi snorted and grabbed Lu Ye's arm again. Lu Yi was helpless. Yi's eyes curved into crescents when she sensed his mood. Given the current situation, it was probably impossible to drive Yi back. Even if he really did get rid of her, it would only cause her to take unnecessary risks. If the previous incident happened again, who could guarantee that Yi would be able to get through it safely? With no other choice, Lu Yi summoned his star boat and boarded it with Yi. Yi cheered and jumped for joy. She couldn't help but jump up and hold Lu Ye's face, kissing him on the cheek. "I knew Lu Yi was the best." Lu Yi rubbed the place where she was kissed in a daze for a long time before her expression turned serious. "Don't be so happy just yet. You'll come with me this time. As for whether or not you want to enter the Soul Race's ancestral land, we'll talk about it later." If he had the chance, he wanted to enter the Spirita's ancestral land and take a look. But according to Li Shang, the Spirita's ancestral land was a special place that only the Spiritas could enter. It was impossible for a creature of flesh and blood like Lu Yi to enter. This was also one of the reasons why the ancestral land of the Soul Race had remained safe and sound since time immemorial. Flesh and blood could not enter, and almost no one could break through the Spirita's ancestral land. Not to mention, there were many Spirita's powerhouses, and the strength of their foundation was not inferior to any top domain. Given the current situation, he could only bring Yi along with him and observe the situation later. Yi didn't seem to care. She could tell that Lu Yi wasn't telling the truth. Once they arrived at the Spirita's ancestral land, she could just hide inside. Would Lu Yi be able to drag her out? Lu Yi sat down cross-legged on the star boat and leaned into Yi's arms. Once they arrived at the Spirita's ancestral land, who knew when they would meet again? He cherished this rare moment with him very much. Half a month later, the entrance to the insect tunnel appeared in the distance. There was a floating continent next to the tunnel, and there were several palace-like buildings built on the floating continent. This should be the base that the cultivators of Tsangyue Galaxy had built here. There must be a Yu Yao cultivator overseeing this place. All cultivators who entered and exited the tunnel had to be checked, and there were also Yu Yao cultivators on the other side. Therefore, if one wanted to enter Tsangyue Galaxy, they had to obtain the permission of the Yu Yao cultivator overseeing this place. However, under normal circumstances, this was possible because the cultivators of Tsangyue Galaxy could also enter other galaxies through other people's insect tunnels. If everyone sealed their own insect tunnels and forbade others from entering, cultivators from other galaxies wouldn't be able to come and go. It wasn't as vast as the fleets of the Three Realms and the Four Directions galaxies that Lu Yi had brought with him. It was basically no problem for a single constellation to pass through. When they arrived at the floating continent, Lu Yi put away the spirit boat. Immediately, a cultivator who sensed the commotion came out from one of the palaces to greet them. It was a mid-stage constellation cultivator, so he was naturally from Tsangyue Galaxy. The person overseeing this place was a Yu Yao expert, but there was definitely more than one Yu Yao. There was always a need for someone to help out and take care of trivial matters. Usually, the constellation cultivators who were assigned to this place to assist the Yu Yao of their galaxy had some background. This was because not only were they able to earn a generous monthly salary by working in this place, but they could also make some money. This mid-stage constellation cultivator had a chubby face and big ears, which made him look charmingly naive. Lu Yi immediately thought of Dahai of the War Province. Generally speaking, it wasn't difficult to get in touch with people like this, provided that the benefits were in place. The fat cultivator walked over and cupped his fists. "Greetings, fellow Taoist. May I know what brings you here?" Lu Yi returned the greeting and said, "I would like to borrow your galaxy's insect path. Please make an exception." The fat cultivator narrowed his eyes. "Borrowing the path is a common occurrence. However, I hope fellow Taoist will forgive me. I need to do some registration here, so I need to ask fellow Taoist some questions." As he said so, he took out a jade slip and prepared to register it. "Please ask, fellow Taoist." Lu Yi knew that this was a normal procedure. Even if Tsang Yue didn't care about a constellation cultivator entering, there were still some matters that needed to be investigated. The fat cultivator immediately asked Lu Yi a few questions, such as his background, where he was currently residing in the myriad oceanic body, his purpose of entering Tsang Yue Galaxy, and so on. Lu Yi answered them one by one. There was no way to investigate his background, so Lu Yi said that he was Wushuang Luye. The fat cultivator could only record his name. As for his purpose of entering Tsang Yue Galaxy, Lu Yi told him that he was just borrowing the path to enter the next galaxy. There was no way to investigate these matters in detail. Tsang Yue couldn't possibly send someone to accompany Lu Yi and send him away. Therefore, the registration here was just a formality. This was also related to Lu Ye's low cultivation level. If Yu Yao or Ri Zhao were here, they wouldn't be treated like this. The next part was the main event. The fat cultivator chuckled and looked at Lu Yi. "Fellow Taoist, you should know the rules. 2 people and 1 beast, so—" He rubbed his fingers. Lu Yi asked, "How do you accept?" The fat cultivator said, "Based on the number of people, each person will be charged 1,000 spirit jades." That was a little expensive. However, this was reasonable. Once a cultivator entered another galaxy, they could collect spirit jades there. If the spirit jades of their own galaxy were plundered, they naturally had to pay a fee. Although Lu Yi didn't have many spirit jades in his pockets, he still had 1 or 2 million spirit jades. He naturally paid the 3,000 spirit jades without hesitation. As expected, this kind of fat cultivator was usually greedy. As long as the spirit jades were in place, everything was fine. However, if the spirit jades weren't in place, who knew how they would make things difficult for him? After accepting the spirit jades, the fat cultivator immediately took out a token. "Fellow Taoist, you can enter with this token. However, I still have to remind you of the rules. The spirit jades in Tsang Yue Galaxy? Fellow Taoist, you can't collect them." Although this was what he said, if Lu Yi really did it, no one would know. The prerequisite was that he didn't get discovered. Therefore, most cultivators who entered another galaxy wouldn't take it to heart even if they were warned like this. "That's all?" Lu Yi took the token. He originally thought that he would have to meet with Yu Yao, who was overseeing this place. Who would have thought that a single constellation would be taken care of? He didn't even have to enter the main hall. It wasn't anything troublesome in the first place. The fat cultivator chuckled and bowed again. "Then, I wish fellow Taoist a smooth future." "Many thanks." Lu Yi thanked him, then led Hu Pe and Yi towards the insect path. Looking in the direction Lu Yi left, the fat cultivator's face became brighter and brighter. He was really happy. He had obtained another 3,000 spirit jades. One had to know that even if he shared these spirit jades with his other senior and junior brothers, each of them would get several hundred spirit jades. Aside from overseeing this place, there was no other place that would receive this kind of free gift of spirit jades. Soon, Lu Yi and the others arrived in front of the insect path. They could sense that this insect path was very stable. In other words, there wouldn't be any side effects if they passed through it. This reminded Lu Yi of the insect path in Jade Conch. He was certain that the insect path was connected to the Wanxiang Galaxy. However, because it had only been born a few years ago, it hadn't stabilized yet. If he and Tang Jun hadn't used the Void Beast's core, they wouldn't have been able to escape. He didn't know how long it would take for the insect path to stabilize. When that time came, it would be much easier for Jade Conch's cultivators to come to the Wanxiang Galaxy. They wouldn't have to waste several years. Even the 4 cardinal galaxies would benefit from it. When the time came, they could enter the Wanxiang Galaxy through Jade Conch's insect path. It would be much better than passing through the mist dragon and borrowing the insect path cloud. However, not every insect path would stabilize. Some insect paths were always in chaos and couldn't be used. Some insect paths might even collapse again. Therefore, whether or not Jade Conk's insect path could be used and when it could be used was completely up to the will of the heavens. After passing through the insect path, the group arrived at the Tsangyue galaxy. There was also a floating continent here. When Lu Yi and the others appeared, a cultivator came to greet them. He checked the token Lu Yi had spent 3,000 spirit jades on and confirmed that there was no mistake. Lu Yi summoned his star boat and flew in a certain direction under Li Shang's guidance. Lu Yi had never figured out how to reach the soul race's ancestral land because Li Shang didn't tell him in detail. He only told him that he would know when the time came. Moreover, the route Li Shang gave him only led to the Tsangyue galaxy. Lu Yi couldn't help but wonder if the soul race's ancestral land was in the Tsangyue galaxy. But if that was the case, why hadn't it been discovered in the Tsangyue galaxy? He couldn't figure it out. He could only confirm the specific situation when the time came. End. Chapter 1651. 2 months after entering Tsangyue galaxy, Lu Yi finally arrived at a certain location under Li Shang's guidance. This place was obviously relatively desolate. There were no realms nearby, and there were no cultivators to be seen. After arriving, Li Shang had Lu Yi find a dead star, and the star boat sailed into it. Was the soul race's ancestral land really in Tsangyue galaxy? Lu Yi was rather surprised. As far as he knew, no one knew the exact location of the soul race's ancestral land so far. He had never thought that this secret would be revealed to him so easily. Lu Yi was rather curious and wanted to know what kind of place the soul race's ancestral land was. As if reading Lu Ye's mind, Li Shang smiled and explained, "The ancestral land is not here." Not here? Lu Yi was stunned. If it wasn't here, then why did they come here? Li Shang explained, "The ancestral land drifts outside the starry sky. It can be said to be everywhere, but also nowhere. So far, no one has truly discovered the ancestral land." These words confused Lu Yi. After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi said, "A mystic realm? Only a mystic realm would have such strange characteristics, but to say it was everywhere was a bit exaggerated. The starry sky was boundless, and no mystic realm could cover the entire starry sky. However, one thing was certain, the soul race's ancestral land drifted outside the starry sky, so no one had truly discovered it. It's similar but not exactly." Li Shang raised his hand as he spoke, and a dot of light slowly condensed in his hand. Soon, the light turned into a pure white bead. Lu Yi stared at the bead. Is this a soul bead? Star beasts had crystal cores, monster races had monster cores, and the soul race also had something similar, a soul bead. Lu Yi had only heard of it before. Even though he had known Li Shang for so long and had even experienced many dangers together, he had never seen his soul bead. This thing was a treasure. The reason why the soul race was coveted by some people with ulterior motives in the starry skies was because they had an extremely special soul possession power that could greatly increase the strength of the possessed person. The second reason was because of this soul bead. This thing contained extremely pure spiritual energy. If a cultivator could refine it, it would be of great benefit to their spiritual energy. It could be said that Li Shang's soul bead was countless times better than that top-grade spirit refining pill. If not for the fact that her cultivation was only at the late stage of the constellation realm, the soul orb would not be effective against the sunshine realm. Otherwise, the sunshine realm expert who captured her would have killed her to retrieve her soul orb. Yi could be considered a soul, but the reason she could only use the soul possession art was because she had yet to condense a soul orb of her own. The soul race had their own special cultivation method. Only by using that special cultivation method could they condense a treasure like the soul orb and then master the various secret techniques of the soul race. It was because of this that Yi wanted to follow Li Shang to the soul race's ancestral land. Li Shang had never shown his soul bead in front of Lu Yi. Now that he had taken it out, it was obvious that he was going to make a big move. Although the ancestral land is everywhere and is connected to every corner of the universe, To deepen the connection and open the channel to the ancestral land, I will have to make use of the soul orbs. Lu Yi was surprised. You mean to say that with this soul orb, you soul race can return to your ancestral land anywhere in the universe? That's right. Lu Yi was shocked. When Li Shang said that the ancestral land was everywhere, he did not think much of it and thought it was an exaggeration. But now, it seemed that it was not an exaggeration at all. The soul race's ancestral land was indeed everywhere. It was just that ordinary people could not see or feel it. This had nothing to do with cultivation. What kind of place was the soul race's ancestral land? It should be known that even the reincarnation tree could only send out clones to envelop the entire starry sky with its perception. Furthermore, this perception was not comprehensive. The reincarnation tree could only sense the location of the clones or the vicinity of the domain. It could not sense places without clones. If the soul race's ancestral land was really everywhere, then in comparison, it was much stronger than the reincarnation tree. Then Lu Yi thought of another question. If the soul orb can deepen the connection and return to the ancestral land, then why did you bring me here? In theory, Li Shang could return from the 10,000 Elephant Sea, so there was no need to waste time. Li Shang smiled. Although the soul race can sense the existence of the ancestral land as long as there is a soul orb, it is not possible to open a passage to the ancestral land from any location. Only some special locations can do so, such as here. Lu Yi finally understood why she had come here. It seemed that the soul race's ancestral land was not in Songyue Galaxy, but here was a special place that could open a passage to the soul race's ancestral land. I am not strong enough, so it may take a long time to communicate with the will of the ancestral land. I will have to trouble you to protect me during this time, Li Shang said. Lu Yi nodded. Don't worry. Li Shang immediately sat down cross-legged and closed her eyes. Soul power fluctuated from her body. It seemed that she was using her soul orb to communicate with the ancestral land. Lu Yi suddenly frowned and sent a sound transmission. Did Li Shang just mention the will of the ancestral land? He did not pay attention to it before, but now he suddenly reacted. The soul race's ancestral land had a will. This was a bit unusual. The 9 provinces also had a will, but that was Little Nine's will. Many worlds also had their own will of the world, but that will was not clear and was completely different from Little Nine's. He did not know what kind of existence the will of the soul race's ancestral land was, but if it was the same as Little Nine's, it would be incredible. Really? Yi obviously did not care, looking at Lu Yi with a pitiful expression. Lu Yi, you really can't go to the soul race's ancestral land with big sister Li Shang? No, after Li Shang leaves, you will come with me. Yi pursed her lips and did not say anything, but her eyes were darting around. It was unknown what kind of wicked idea she was thinking. Looking around, although this place was remote and there was a high chance that no cultivators would come to disturb them, it was better to be safe than sorry. Thinking about it, Lu Yi flicked his finger and immediately 3 blood-red lights flew out, turning into 3 figures. He focused her eyes and was immediately shocked, because these 3 figures were all Lu Yi. Moreover, in her perception, she could not see any difference, and even their auras were exactly the same as Lu Ye's. These 3 figures were naturally formed by 3 drops of precious blood. In the past 2 months, when hurrying on the road, Lu Yi, in addition to talking with Yi, had been condensing his precious blood. In addition to the drop of precious blood that was naturally born when he tempered his body to the extreme, Lu Yi had condensed 2 more drops in these 2 months. It was not that he was lazy, but that even with his foundation, condensing precious blood was not easy. Now, he only had 3 drops of precious blood. Lu Yi, there are so many of you, he shouted excitedly, grabbing Lu Ye's arm. She knew that Lu Yi had clones, but she had never seen so many of them. Amazing, right? Lu Yi was proud. He nodded her head like a chicken pecking rice. What kind of magical method was this? She also wanted to learn it. Unfortunately, she could see at a glance that these clones were related to a cultivator's blood essence, so she was afraid she could not learn it. Soon, the 3 clones were scattered in different directions under Lu Ye's command, in charge of guarding. He watched the 3 clones leave and tilted her head, whimsical. Lu Yi, in the future, when you have something to do and leave one for me to play with. Lu Yi laughed. That's a clone, not a cat or a dog. And the clone can't be too far away from me, or it will be useless. In terms of distance from the main body, there was a big gap between the precious blood clone and the talent tree clone. He did not know if this would improve with the improvement of his cultivation. He suddenly showed a disappointed look, suddenly finding that these clones were not so great. The 3 clones were on guard in 3 directions, so if someone came, Lu Yi would know in advance. Fortunately, this place was indeed desolate. Not to mention cultivators, even the shadow of a star beast could not be seen. Li Shang had been sitting cross-legged, using his soul bead to communicate with the will of the ancestral land, his soul power fluctuating. After half a day, there were some changes on the other side. When Lu Yi turned his head to look, he saw the void in front of Li Shang rippling like water, then the space became blurred and distorted, and in the blink of an eye, the space turned into a fog-like existence. The fog continued to distort, and then colorful lights blindly refracted. A moment later, a blooming lotus appeared in Lu Ye's vision. The lotus was like a real thing, blooming with supreme multicolored light, beautiful and magnificent. When it appeared, Lu Yi even felt an instinctive desire in his divine soul, as if he smelled meat when he was hungry. He immediately understood that this lotus-like existence had a great effect on the growth of his divine soul. The lotus was in full bloom, and the initial fog lingered around the stamen, leading to an unknown place. Lu Yi suppressed the instinctive desire and carefully sensed it. He could vaguely feel that there was a void power fluctuating from the stamen. It was a little similar to the feeling he had in the insect path. He couldn't help but be moved. The lotus appearance was a little strange, but in the end, this was essentially an insect path. An insect path leading to the ancestral land of the soul race. What was the name of the soul race's ancestral land? It actually had such a wonderful power. One must know that insect paths were basically innate. Even an existence like the reincarnation tree could not create an insect path out of thin air, and could only rely on the connection between the main body and the clones to circulate. But Li Shang just communicated with the soul race's ancestral land, and a small insect path appeared just like that. It was a little beyond understanding. Almost at the same time as Lu Yi was shocked, he, who had quietly left his side, suddenly rushed towards the lotus. But her body had just moved when the back of her neck was grabbed by a big hand. Yi turned her head and looked at Lu Yi behind her, dancing with joy. Lu Yi, let go of me. Don't even think about it. Lu Yi snorted. Chapter 1652. After being together for so many years, Lu Yi knew what Yi was up to with just a glance. He hadn't decided whether to let Yi and Li Shang go to the soul race's ancestral land, so he couldn't just let her go in. But just as he grabbed Yi, a tiger's roar came from the front. Lu Yi looked up and was stunned, because Hoopa was actually standing on the lotus. There was a traitor. Lu Yi had never thought that Hoopa would stab him in the back. This was obviously under Yi's orders, or else Hoopa wouldn't have done so. He immediately understood that Yi's actions were just a pretense. It would be great if she succeeded, but if she didn't, she could still attract his attention. Hoopa would be able to act calmly. Yi was Hoopa's sorrowful spirit. If Hoopa entered the soul race's ancestral land, how could Lu Yi not let Yi follow? Hoopa, you did well. Yi was held in Lu Yi's hand, no longer angry. You, come out. Lu Yi stared at Hoopa. Hoopa, who had been so majestic just now, immediately lowered his head and looked away guiltily. You can't come out. Yi shouted at Hoopa. Don't forget what I told you before. Lu Yi didn't know what Yi had said to Hoopa, but when Hoopa heard Yi's words, he actually raised his head and his evasive gaze became resolute. That's right, he and Yi's strength were getting further and further away from Lu Yi's. If they wanted to become stronger, they had to enter the soul race's ancestral land. This was their only and best chance. Otherwise, they could never comprehend the soul race's secrets just by cultivating in the Wanxiang Sea. Lu Yi sighed. Children were getting older and harder to discipline. On the side, Li Shang looked at Hoopa with bright eyes, his mood lifted. Lu Yi didn't realize anything when Hoopa stepped on the lotus, But Li Shang knew that this was the best proof that Hoopa had the bloodline of a sacred beast. Flesh and blood couldn't enter the soul race's ancestral land, only sacred beasts were an exception. If Hoopa didn't have the bloodline of a sacred beast, he wouldn't even be able to touch the lotus, let alone step on it. At this moment, Hoopa was standing on top of the lotus flower. This undoubtedly proved that her previous judgment was correct. Hoopa was indeed the Spirita's sacred beast. It was fine if they weren't sure before, but now that they were, Li Shang felt that no matter what, Hoopa had to bring Yi into the Spirita's ancestral land. Otherwise, it wouldn't just be their loss, it would be the Spirita's loss as well. However, Lu Ye's attitude. Li Shang turned to look at Lu Yi. Just as he was about to persuade him, Lu Yi took a step forward and said, "If you don't come out, I'll drag you out." As soon as he finished speaking, he was already standing on top of the lotus flower. He reached out and grabbed the back of Hoopa's neck. Li Shang's eyes suddenly widened. What was going on? Hoopa had the bloodline of a holy beast, so it was one thing for him to be able to stand on the lotus, but how could Lu Yi be able to do it as well? He couldn't say that Lu Yi also had the bloodline of a holy beast, could he? At this moment, on the lotus flower, Lu Yi was carrying Yi in one hand and Hoopa in the other. The spirit and tiger looked at each other helplessly. Lu Yi was startled, because when he stepped on this strange lotus flower, the talent tree in his body suddenly had a strange reaction. This reaction wasn't the kind of reaction when an external force invaded his body and needed to be destroyed. It was a feeling that Lu Yi had never felt before. It was as if the talent tree in his body had a strange resonance with the lotus flower under his feet. However, when he tried to sense it with his mind, there was no reaction. Without waiting for him to think too much, the lotus flowers slowly closed. Lu Yi was startled and was about to leave when he suddenly realized that as the lotus flower closed, his body seemed to be fixed on the petals and couldn't move at all. Li Shang hurriedly flashed over and said, "The passage to the ancestral land won't last long. It's about to close. Don't panic, fellow Taoist." He still looked at Lu Yi in shock, unable to understand what was going on. The ancestral land didn't seem to reject Lu Yi. Lu Yi wasn't very panicked, but this matter was a little baffling. Originally, he wanted to see the situation before deciding whether to let Yi enter the Spirita's ancestral land. But now he had to go in. Not only did he have to go in, but he also had to go in. Well, it just so happened that he had this idea before. It would be best if he could enter the Spirita's ancestral land for himself. He hurriedly constructed a void spirit pattern. In the next moment, 3 blood-red lights flashed and the 3 scattered avatars were recalled, turning into 3 drops of blood that seeped into Lu Ye's body. The lotus flower completely closed and disappeared without a trace. There were no traces of the insect path left here. Only after being wrapped in the lotus form could Lu Ye's body move. He put down Hoopa and knocked Hoopa's head. Hoopa felt wronged. He was the mastermind and he was at most an accomplice. Why was he the one being beaten? He didn't feel anything strange. Lu Yi had just finished teaching Hoopa a lesson when the lotus flower wrapped around them suddenly collapsed. In that instant, Lu Yi couldn't help but feel his mind shake. An incomparably comfortable feeling came from his soul, like a fish in water or a bird in its nest. He turned his head to look around and realized that he was standing in the middle of a void. As far as his eyes could see, there were huge lotus flowers imprinted in his eyes. They looked similar to the lotus flowers that had appeared when Li Shang had connected to the ancestral land, but the size was completely different. These lotus flowers were red, green, pink, yellow, purple. There were also 2-colored, 3-colored, 5-colored ones. The entire world was a riot of colors and extremely gorgeous. This was the Spirita's ancestral land? Lu Yi looked at it curiously. He had traveled extensively and had been to several different galaxies. He had seen many different magnificent wonders in the starry sky, but there really wasn't a place as strange as the Spirita's ancestral land. Although he was in the void, Lu Yi was sure that this was not the starry sky in the ordinary sense. This was because there was a strange energy drifting about here. It was a kind of energy that was greatly beneficial to the soul. In other words, cultivating in this kind of place did not help one's cultivation, but it was unimaginable for one's soul. Wow! He was also dazzled. Although Li Shang had told her a lot about the Spirita's ancestral land, it was only hearsay. Now that she saw it with her own eyes, she found that this strange world was even more beautiful than Li Shang had described. She immediately fell in love with this kind of place, especially the environment. It gave her an extremely comfortable feeling, one that was even stronger than Lu Ye's. Even Hoopa showed an intoxicated expression. Lu Yi suddenly turned his head and looked at Li Shang. "What's wrong?" At this moment, Li Shang was looking at him with a strange expression, his eyes full of disbelief. "Fellow Taoist, you? How did you come in?" Li Shang was puzzled, but he didn't know how to ask. Lu Yi frowned. Li Shang said, "The Spirita's ancestral land is a place where flesh and blood cannot enter. Besides saint beasts, no living being with flesh and blood has ever entered since ancient times, so, how did you come in?" Lu Yi was about to say that it was the lotus that wrapped him up and brought him in, but on second thought, if flesh and blood really couldn't enter, then he really shouldn't have been able to come in. He suddenly remembered that when he stepped on the lotus, the talent tree in his body had some strange reaction, vaguely resonating with the lotus, but when he checked, he didn't find anything. Could it be that his entrance here had something to do with the talent tree? But what did the talent tree have to do with this place? "I don't know." Lu Yi shook his head. Li Shang didn't think Lu Yi could give an answer, so after thinking for a while, he said, "It seems that the ancestral lands will allow you to come in, so it let you in." The fact that flesh and blood couldn't enter was not a restriction of this world, but the ancestral lands will. If the ancestral lands was willing to let Lu Yi in, then there was no problem. But what was so special about Lu Yi that the ancestral lands would treat him like this? Thinking about it carefully, Li Shang found that Lu Yi was indeed quite special. At the very least, before meeting Lu Yi, he never thought that a cultivator could be so strong. Maybe this was why the ancestral lands treated him so well? Since he couldn't figure it out, he couldn't explore it. Temporarily suppressing the doubts in his heart, Li Shang said, "Come with me, we're going to see the elder on duty." In any case, she brought a holy beast back this time, and Lu Yi, a human, had to greet the elder on duty. Moreover, those people in Immortal Essence City also had to be settled. This was not something she could decide as a constellation. Unexpectedly, as soon as her voice fell, a powerful aura rushed over from a distance. Li Shang quickly turned his head to look. Lu Ye's expression also turned cold, because the person who came was obviously Riguang. Almost the next moment when he felt the aura, a light appeared in Lu Ye's vision, and then the light came close, revealing the figure of a young man. At first glance, this young man looked young, dressed in a black robe, but since it was Riguang, his age was no longer accurate. Li Shang was startled and hurriedly bowed. "Greetings, Patriarch." She was secretly surprised. She had just returned, so why was the Patriarch here? Although she was a soul and had cultivated to a constellation, to be honest, she had only seen the Patriarch twice in so many years. This was the third time. This was because in normal times, only the elder on duty was in charge of the clan. The Patriarch did not show himself. Patriarch? Lu Yi knew that as an outsider, she had to pay a visit to the experts here after entering the ancestral land, but she did not expect that before she went to pay a visit, the Patriarch would appear. And it was the Patriarch of the Soul Clan. He had obviously noticed the commotion here. After thinking carefully, Lu Yi remembered the conversation between Li Shang and the reincarnation tree. From this, it seemed that this was Hun Quebec. Lu Yi could feel that this Patriarch of the Soul Clan was stronger than all the Riguang she had seen before. The only one who could be compared to him was probably Ma Bin, but Lu Yi did not have a clear impression of Riguang's strength, so she could not make a correct comparison. However, this Hun Ke was definitely much stronger than Riguang of Wuding. This should be the top Riguang. "Greetings, Senior." Lu Yi bowed respectfully. He also bowed at the side, and even Hoopa lowered his head. End of chapter. Chapter 1653. In the space of the Soul Race's ancestral land, the black-robed Hun Ke rushed over and saw Hoopa at first glance. With his experience, he naturally recognized that this white tiger had the bloodline of a holy beast. Normally, this would definitely make him happy, and it would also be a happy occasion for the soul race. But at this moment, other than joy, he was even more surprised. Because a human had come to the ancestral land. This was something that had never happened since ancient times. If that was all, it would be fine. The key was that this human's arrival seemed to have triggered the ancestral land's will. The reason he rushed here was not because he sensed Lu Ye's arrival, but because he had received instructions from the ancestral land's will. That was why he had come so quickly. Carefully sizing up the newcomer, his cultivation was not high, only at the star constellation level. But since he could trigger the ancestral land's will, he could not be judged simply by his cultivation level. Ordinary soul race members like Li Shang did not know the origins of the ancestral land, but Hun Ke was the patriarch of the soul race, so how could he not know? It was because he knew that he did not dare to be disrespectful. At this moment, Li Shang looked at Hun Ke in fear. Because she had snuck out of the soul race's ancestral land, she had violated the ancestral rules. Now that she had returned, she would definitely be punished. She had thought that as long as she met the elder on duty, she would at most be locked up for a period of time. Who would have thought that the patriarch would come personally? If the patriarch found out that she had snuck out, it would be bad. The elder on duty might be merciful to her, but the patriarch definitely would not. Feeling uneasy, Li Shang quickly said, "Patriarch, I found the bloodline of a holy beast outside, but I'm not sure if it is it, so I brought it back for you to take a look." While speaking, Li Shang could not help but feel puzzled. Because after the patriarch arrived, he seemed to be paying more attention to Lu Yi and not Hu Pe. Something was wrong. After she finished speaking, Hun Ke moved his gaze away from Lu Yi and looked deeply at Hu Pe. He nodded slightly. It is indeed the bloodline of a holy beast. Being able to enter the ancestral land proved this point. If it was not the bloodline of a holy beast, the ancestral lands would not have allowed it. That's great, I was afraid that I had misjudged him. Li Shang's face was filled with joy. Now he could atone for his mistakes. Although she had snuck out, bringing back the sacred beast bloodline was a great contribution to the ancestral land. She didn't ask for a reward. She just wanted them to not punish her. By the way, Patriarch, I've also found some of our lost clansmen. Li Shang hurriedly said. Huh? Hun Ke was puzzled. Lost clansmen? Patriarch, please take a look. Li Shang hurriedly took out the myriad soul banner and respectfully handed it to Hun Quebec. Then, he briefly explained the matter of the immortal origin city. Hun Ke held the 10,000 soul banner and listened quietly with a calm expression. When Li Shang finished speaking and understood the whole story, Hun Ke nodded and said, "You abandoned your physical body and lived for 10,000 years with your soul to resist the enemies. Such a tenacious mind, you are qualified to join our soul clan." As soon as he finished speaking, he exerted a little force in his hand and the myriad soul banner shattered. Hun Ke obviously didn't have a good impression of this thing that enslaved souls. Then, his soul power surged and the shattered myriad soul banner turned into a round ball. He held it in his hand and threw it back to Li Shang. "Since you brought them back, I'll let you settle them down." Li Shang received it in a daze and instinctively replied, "Yes." But on second thought, settle them down herself? She was just a small character in the Soul Clan. How could she settle down so many clansmen? Just as she was having a headache, Hun Ke shot a 5-colored stream of light at her. "Go and choose a lotus land." Seeing the 5-colored stream of light, Li Shang's expression suddenly became joyful. He reached out and grabbed the 5-colored stream of light and said happily, "Thank you, Patriarch." Hun Ke took a deep look at Lu Yi and left in an instant. Lu Yi relaxed a little. He had seen a lot of sunlight, but the Soul Clan's patriarch gave him a lot of pressure. Fortunately, the other party seemed to be easy to talk to. However, the situation here seemed to be a little different from what he had imagined. Li Shang had always said that Hu Po was the Soul Clan's sacred beast. He had thought that Hu Po would be worshipped by the Soul Clan here. How could that not be the case? They should at least welcome her. Who knew that this was not the case? However, since the patriarch had personally appeared, there was no doubt that Hu Po was very important to the Soul Clan. Turning his head, he saw Li Shang happily playing with a 5-colored token. His eyes were curved as he smiled. He was clearly very happy. What is this? Lu Yi asked. Li Shang put away the 5-colored token and called out, "Come with me first. I'll tell you on the way." Lu Yi, and Hupa followed Li Shang. Along the way they saw huge lotus flowers. Some were in full bloom, while others were in the shape of flower buds. They had different postures and were filled with multicolored light. The entire Soul Clan's ancestral land space was incomparably gorgeous and magical. The lotus flowers you see are lotus lands, Li Shang explained as he looked at Lu Yi. Li Shang looked around and explained to Lu Yi, the ancestral land of the Spiritas is a very special place. There are no outer realms here, nor are there any other places to stay. There are only lotus continents like this. Our clansmen live on these lotus continents. They are our home. And the lotus lands are also divided into ranks. You can tell by looking at the number of colors. From 1st rank to 7th rank, the more colors there are, the higher the rank. Generally speaking, those below 3rd rank correspond to clansmen below the constellation level. They live on 1st or 2nd rank lotus lands. When their cultivation reaches the constellation level, they can choose a 3rd rank lotus land. When they reach Yu Yao, they have the right to choose a 5th rank lotus land. As for the Sunshine clansmen, they live on 7th rank lotus lands. As he spoke, he waved the 5-colored token in his hand at Lu Yi. With this, I can choose an ownerless 5-colored lotus land. She was a constellation level. Logically speaking, she could not choose a 5-colored lotus land. That was exclusive to Yu Yao. But since the patriarch had given her the 5-colored token, there was no problem. To the Soul Clan, the lotus lands were not just a place to stay, but also a place to cultivate. Even though the Soul Clan's ancestral land was filled with energy that could help the growth of soul power, the lotus lands were always where the energy was most concentrated. Simply put, every lotus land was a cultivation treasure land. The higher the rank, the greater the benefits for cultivation. Hun Ke had given Li Shang a 5-colored token. How could Li Shang not be happy? This was not just a reward. It also meant that the patriarch did not care about her sneaking out. She did not have to worry about being punished. From the looks of it, bringing back a sacred beast was a great merit. Not only was there no punishment, there was even a reward. However, it wasn't easy to find a 5-colored lotus land. Although there were many 5-colored lotus lands in the ancestral land, Yu Yao of the Spiritas had many of them. Many of the 5-colored lotus lands had owners. If she wanted to find an ownerless one, she would have to search carefully. She would definitely find one because there were more 5-colored lotus lands in the ancestral land than in Yu Yao's. On a deeper level, the patriarch did not even mention the sacred beast. This meant that the sacred beast was left to her to guard. Moreover, there were her clansmen in Immortal Origin City. Li Shang could definitely establish a faction of her own in a short time. There were not many disputes in the Soul Clan's ancestral land, but there was competition. Those who had the qualifications to establish their own factions were all Yu Yao. Every once in a while, there would be a competition in the ancestral land. If one could obtain a good ranking in such a competition, they would be able to obtain substantial benefits. With a 5-colored token, the sacred beast, and her clansmen in Immortal Origin City, Li Shang already had the capital to establish her own faction. It could be said that she had taken a step forward compared to others. This would have a profound impact on her future. Lu Yi was not clear about this. After all, he had just arrived, so he did not know much about the Soul Clan. At this moment, he followed Li Shang and listened to her explanation while looking around curiously. There were quite a few translucent cotton-like objects floating around, and there were quite a few of them. Lu Yi could even sense some peculiar soul force undulations coming from these cotton-like objects. "What are these?" he asked. Li Shang glanced at them and said, "These are clansmen who have not been born yet. Be careful not to touch them. At this time they are very weak." Is this how the Soul Clan is born? Lu Yi was stunned. He had been thinking about a question for a long time. How did the Soul Clan reproduce? Logically speaking, the Soul Clan did not have flesh and blood, so they did not have the ability to reproduce. It was only now that he realized how miraculous the Soul Clan's reproduction was. Basically, they are all born this way. Of course, there are exceptions. Everyone in Immortal Origin City is an exception, and there is also E. Li Shang smiled and explained, the ancestral land is everywhere. If some special creatures die in this world, but their souls still exist, they may be accepted into the ancestral land. But even so, when they are accepted into the ancestral land, they are in this state and have no memories of their lives. But generally speaking, those who are accepted into the ancestral land from the outside world will not have low achievements in the future. After all, those who can be accepted by the ancestral land are not ordinary people. What about you? Lu Yi asked curiously. Li Shang shook her head. I don't know. No one in the Soul Clan knows how they were born. After gaining sentience, they have been living here. In addition to these Soul Clan members who were still in the process of being born, Lu Yi also saw many Soul Clan members living here without any worries. Compared to the noise and chaos of the outside world, this place was simply like a paradise. Many Soul Clan members looked at Lu Yi and Hupo from afar. They had never seen creatures other than the Soul Clan, so they were naturally curious, but it was only curiosity. How many Yu Yao and Ri Zhao do your Soul Clan have? Lu Yi thought of another question. Such a paradise was especially suitable for the Spiritas to cultivate. Just how great of a background had they accumulated over countless years? If it's Yu Yao, there should be 2,000 or 3,000. Li Shang's words gave Lu Yi a fright. 2,000 or 3,000 Yu Yao, what kind of concept was that? End of chapter. Chapter 1654. That seemed to be the limit of 9 states constellations. But how could constellations be compared to Yu Yao? Even the top realms could not have so many Yu Yao, let alone 9 states. It would take an entire galaxy to have that many. If it's Ri Zhao, 200 or 300? Li Shang could not be sure. After all, her cultivation was too low and she did not know too many secrets. Lu Yi was numb. 200 or 300 Ri Zhao and 2,000 or 3,000 Yu Yao. Such a force could be said to be the largest force in the universe. The world's understanding of the soul race was only superficial. They did not know that it was a terrifying monster. Even when 9 states was at its peak, it could not be compared to the soul race. If such a force charged out of the soul race's ancestral land, who could stop it? Fortunately, the soul race did not seem to have any intention of dominating the universe. They had been in seclusion for so many years that it was difficult to see them. However, Lu Yi thought about it. The soul race's methods were mainly based on the soul. They were relatively simple and could be easily countered. There were many treasures and methods in the world that could block soul attacks. Therefore, although the soul race was terrifying, it would not be easy for them to dominate the universe. Once the various races were forced to unite, the soul race would not have a good ending. The soul race's most powerful technique was still soul possession. Li Shang's constellation soul possession was enough to greatly increase Lu Ye's strength. If Yu Yao or Ri Zhao used soul possession, Lu Yi didn't know how much his strength would increase. Of course, if Yu Yao or Ri Zhao used soul possession on him, he would have to endure immense pressure. He might not be able to withstand it. All the gains of power came with a price. While Li Shang was searching for a suitable 5-colored lotus land with Lu Yi, Hun Kei's figure suddenly appeared on a 7-colored lotus land in the ancestral land. The owner of this land was Ri Zhao of the soul race. He was also the elder on duty. When he sensed Hun Kei's aura, he quickly came out. Unlike Hun Kei's youthful appearance, this elder on duty looked much older. Patriarch, I sense the aura of a sacred beast. Is it really a sacred beast? Asked the elder on duty. It's a sacred beast. Its bloodline is quite rich. Hun Kei nodded. That's a joyous occasion for our soul clan. The elder on duty immediately became excited. Even Ri Zhao could not suppress his excitement. Ordinary soul race members might not know why the white tiger had become their race's sacred beast, but how could these Ri Zhao not know? The Spiritas and sacred beasts complemented each other. If they cultivated together with sacred beasts, their cultivation efficiency would increase tremendously. Moreover, the Spiritas who cultivated together with sacred beasts would never encounter any bottlenecks. In the history of the soul race, There were at least a few hundred Sunshine Realm cultivators who had achieved this because they had cultivated together with the sacred beasts of the past. To the soul race, a sacred beast could mean the birth of many Sunshine Realm elites. Ever since the death of the previous generation of sacred beasts, the ancestral land had not seen any traces of sacred beasts for 10,000 years. In these 10,000 years, the soul race had only given birth to 2 Rizhou. Although the environment of the ancestral land was extremely beneficial to the cultivation of the Spiritas, if one wanted to break through to sunshine, the environment wouldn't be able to provide much help. This was because the Spiritas did not have a body of flesh and blood. This was a natural flaw. In his excitement, the elder on duty asked, "Patriarch, how should we settle the Saint Beast? I have a few people here who can follow it." He was the elder on duty, so he naturally knew about the rising stars of the soul race. In his opinion, if these people could obtain the help of the Saint Beast, there was a high chance that they would become Sunshine Realm elites in the future. This matter is not urgent. Hun Ke shook his head. The elder on duty was stunned. This was such an important matter. Could it be that there was something more important than this? The will of the ancestral land has been triggered. Hun Ke spoke again. The elder on duty couldn't help but open his mouth. After a long while, he said, "Could it be that the Saint Beast this time is extraordinary? Otherwise, how could it trigger the will of the ancestral land? It's not because of the Saint Beast." Hun Ke shook his head. This time, other than the Saint Beast, a human also entered. A human? The elder on duty was shocked. How could a human enter? He suddenly realized. Patriarch, are you saying that the human triggered the will of the ancestral land? Other than him, there's no other possibility. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to enter the ancestral land. Hun Ke nodded. But, how is this possible? The elder on duty had a look of disbelief. How could a mere human trigger the will of the ancestral land? He looked at Hun Ke and carefully asked, "Patriarch, when the will of the ancestral land was triggered, did it pass down any instructions?" Hun Ke looked at the elder on duty meaningfully. "Take good care of him." The elder on duty was shocked. What kind of human had come to make the will of the ancestral land pass down such instructions? Soon, a memory that was so old that it was almost covered in dust appeared in the elder on duty's mind. He said, "Patriarch, it said that the birth of the ancestral land is related to a supreme being. The true body of the ancestral land is actually a treasure of that supreme being? The ancestral land of the Soul Clan did not exist in this world. However, there was such a supreme being who used a treasure of his to open up a special space in this part of the universe. That was how the ancestral land of the Soul Clan came into existence and gave birth to the Soul Clan. This was information passed down from the ancient times of the Soul Clan. However, up until now, no Soul Clan member knew whether this was true or not. They also didn't know what kind of treasure could open up the space of the ancestral land of the Soul Clan. However, it was undeniable that if such a treasure really existed, it would definitely be a starry sky supreme treasure. There is such a saying, Hun Ke replied. The elder on duty narrowed his eyes. Then is there a possibility that supreme being met with an accident and reincarnated? Otherwise, why would the will of the ancestral land pass down such an instruction? The entire ancestral land was a space opened up by that supreme being's treasure. The ancestral land sensed the reincarnation of that supreme being, so it passed down an instruction. It was reasonable. Hun Ke's eyelids twitched when he heard this. Needless to say, this was really possible. However, after thinking about it, Hun Ke shook his head. That shouldn't be the case. If it's really as you said, the will of the ancestral land wouldn't pass down such an instruction. The ancestral land would probably directly recognize a master. That's true. The elder on duty felt that he had taken things for granted. However, the will of the ancestral lands was really inconceivable. Why was this so? What was so special about that human? The sacred beast has a very deep bond and connection with that human. Therefore, I have already let Li Shang handle this matter on his own. As for the sacred beast, we won't interfere for the time being. However, you can spread the news that if anyone can gain the sacred beast's recognition, they can stay by its side and cultivate. The elder on duty nodded. He could imagine that the Soul Clan would be lively for a period of time. There would definitely be a large number of people rushing to the sacred beast's side to gain its recognition. It would be inappropriate if the sacred beast was annoyed or the human felt uncomfortable because of this. Therefore, he had to carefully consider the candidates. He couldn't just let any of his clansmen go over. I want to try to contact the will of the ancestral land and see what's going on, Hun Kei said. He was a top expert who had been in the Sunshine Realm for many years. Now, he had to worry about a human from the Constellation Realm. It was simply unreasonable. However, this matter involved the will of the ancestral land. He couldn't be careless. But, Patriarch, how are we going to take care of that human? We don't have anything suitable for him to eat. The elder on duty felt a headache coming on. He didn't dare to ignore the will of the ancestral land. However, there was indeed nothing suitable for the human to eat in the ancestral land. Patriarch, why don't you take out some soul crystals? I'll go out and buy some treasures for him. The elder on duty thought of a good idea. No need. Those treasures are still external forces. Since we have to take care of him, we have to think about the problem from the root. Hun Kei shook his head. He pondered for a while and said, "How long has it been since the lotus pond was opened?" The elder on duty was shocked. Patriarch, you mean, open the lotus pond. I'll have to trouble you guys with this matter. Hun Kei left in a flash. The elder on duty was stunned for a long time. Then his eyes twitched. Open the lotus pond. The patriarch had only said a few simple words. However, the elders would be exhausted. After all, it wasn't time yet. If they opened the lotus pond in advance, they would have to prepare for it. That human, where did he come from? The elder on duty was dying of curiosity. In the space of the ancestral land, Li Shang led Lu Yi and the others around for a long time. However, they still couldn't find a suitable five-colored lotus land. She wasn't in a hurry. In any case, there must be an ownerless five-colored lotus land in the ancestral land. They just had to search carefully. However, when they passed by a location, Li Shang suddenly stopped and turned to look to the side. Lu Yi followed her gaze and saw a huge flower bud waiting to bloom. When everyone looked over, the flower bud actually slowly bloomed, and coincidentally, the petals flowed with multicolored light. Li Shang was overjoyed. That's it. A newly formed five-colored lotus land was definitely ownerless. Therefore, they didn't have to waste any effort to find it. Moreover, a newly formed five-colored lotus land had unknown potential. It wasn't like those that had bloomed long ago. Those lotuses that had bloomed long ago were already five-colored. However, a newly formed five-colored lotus land might evolve into a six-colored or seven-colored lotus land. If they took it now, it would evolve into a six-colored or seven-colored lotus land one day. They would make a huge profit. When the time came, there would be a sacred beast living here. Even if Li Shang wasn't strong enough, the soul race wouldn't chase them away. After waiting quietly for the lotus land to fully bloom, Li Shang led Lu Yi and the others to fly down. Previously, Lu Yi didn't see much from afar. Now that she was close, Lu Yi realized that the lotus land had the same characteristics as the soul race. It was an existence that seemed illusory yet real. It was very strange. End of chapter. Chapter 1655. From afar, the entire lotus continent looked like a huge five-colored lotus flower. Its petals bloomed slowly and it was the size of a city. It was not a problem for a few thousand soul race cultivators to survive in such a lotus continent. As Li Shang landed on the lotus continent, Lu Yi could not help but be shocked. When he first entered the soul race's ancestral land, he noticed that this strange space was filled with energy that could strengthen soul power. Living in such an environment, a cultivator's soul power would definitely grow and be nourished greatly. When he arrived at the lotus continent, Lu Yi discovered that the environment here was even better. It was far from what ordinary places could compare to. It was no wonder that to the soul race, the lotus continents were treasured lands for cultivation. Li Shang happily came to the center of the flower and took out the 5-colored token that Hun Kei had given her. She threw it forward and the token turned into a stream of light that disappeared into the flower. At the same time, the entire lotus continent shook slightly as if there were some invisible changes. Lu Yi could not sense anything, but as long as one was a soul race cultivator, they could sense that this 5-colored lotus continent had an owner from today onwards. Immediately after, she took out the ball formed by the 10,000 soul banner and poured her soul power into it. Lu Ye's expression turned solemn as he came to her side. As Li Shang's soul power surged, the ball began to change. Slowly, it seemed like it was going to melt. However, as the ball melted, figures appeared from within. They were the souls of Immortal Origin City. City Lord Zhang Zishan was the first to appear. During this period of time, he and the souls of Immortal Origin City had been staying in the 10,000 soul banner, so they knew nothing about what had happened outside. However, because Lu Yi and Li Shang had informed him in advance, he already had a guess when he appeared. Turning his head to look around and feeling the strange environment, Zhang Zishan's eyes lit up. City Lord. Lu Yi stepped forward and bowed. This is the soul race's ancestral land? Zhang Zishan asked. Lu Yi nodded. It is the soul race's ancestral land. It's a very strange place. Zhang Zishan felt for a moment and sighed. It is indeed strange. I can feel that living in this place is much better than sleeping in the soul pool. To put it bluntly, the soul pool was the gathering of soul-cleansing water. It was a treasure that could nourish one's spirit. Even if souls were to sleep in it, they would slowly consume the soul-cleansing water. If they were to accidentally die in battle and be resurrected, the consumption would be even greater. The biggest problem that the Immortal Essence Defenders faced back then was that once their soul pools dried up, their souls would dissipate along with them. This was also the reason why Zhang Zishan didn't allow Lu Yi to take away too much soul-cleansing water. After all, it was the foundation of the Immortal Essence Defenders. The soul race's ancestral land wasn't a soul pond, but it was much more advanced than a soul pond. The Lotus Land was filled with a miraculous force that could nourish the divine soul. Living in such a place, the Immortal Essence Guardians did not need to sleep. As the two of them spoke, Immortal Essence Guardians appeared one after another. Lu Yi saw many familiar faces. The butcher, the scholar, the gambler Lu Sanbao, the red-clothed Hong Yu, and the Pipa Shi Weining. Every soul showed a look of surprise as they felt around, as if they had been reborn. Lu Yi exhaled a long breath. Since solving the underground insect nest inside 9 regions, the Immortal Essence Guardians had always been a knot in Lu Ye's heart. These ancestors had paid too much for 9 regions. As a junior, not only must he remember their contributions, but he must also do his best to settle them down. The blood of the ancestors could not be shed in vain, and their contributions could not be forgotten. However, Lu Yi had no clue how to settle the Immortal Essence Guardians until he met Li Shang at the auction of the Vientiane Chamber of Commerce. Today, he had finally found a safe and suitable place for these ancestors to settle down. As a junior, Lu Yi was very proud that he didn't let these ancestors down and didn't let them be forgotten in the long river of history. A moment later, all the Immortal Essence Guardians appeared. Not only were there Immortal Essence Guardians, but there were also some unlucky souls. These people were originally training in the Wushuang continent, but they were killed by Sun Ying and others from the Qing Li Dao world. Their souls were collected into the 10,000 soul banner, and now they also appeared here. However, the number of these unlucky souls was much smaller than the Immortal Essence Guardians. City Lord, you will live here from now on. Fellow Taoist Li Shang will take care of you, Lu Yi said. Zhang Zishan looked at Li Shang and bowed deeply. Thank you, fellow Taoist. Li Shang smiled. From today on, we are clansmen. You don't have to be so polite. These souls in the Immortal Essence City were her team. Although these Immortal Essence Guardians were not strong now, and were at most at the Divine Sea realm, their experience was not comparable to that of the ordinary Soul Clan. What they lacked before was a suitable living environment and cultivation method. Now they had everything here. Li Shang had a hunch that these Immortal Essence Guardians would definitely have good achievements in the future. What's more, she had the holy beast on her side. To be honest, Li Shang was a little surprised that the patriarch didn't take the holy beast away. Logically speaking, it was a big deal for the Soul Clan that she brought the holy beast back. However, in fact, the patriarch just came over and left. Not only did she not take the holy beast away, she didn't even mention it. However, this was a good thing for her. Fellow Taoist, what should we do now? Zhang Zishan asked. The other immortal essence guardians also looked at them eagerly. They were a little confused when they suddenly came to a new environment. Li Shang thought for a moment and said, "Then let's go find a place to live." A place to live? Zhang Zishan looked around and was a little puzzled. In such a place, there wasn't even a house to live in. Did they have to build one? Li Shang smiled. Find a suitable place to make yourself comfortable. Immerse yourself in communicating with the Lotus Land. Zhang Zishan turned to look at Lu Yi. Lu Yi shook his head, indicating that he didn't know. However, since Li Shang said so, there must be a reason. At once, the immortal essence defenders dispersed, and Yi and Hoopa began to stroll around the Lotus Land. The entire Lotus Land's environment was not much different. Yi didn't have any special requirements and quickly chose a place. Then, she immersed herself in communicating with the Lotus Land according to Li Shang's instructions. Lu Yi stood to the side and watched quietly. However, his expression soon became subtle because Yi was right under his nose a moment ago, but she disappeared in the blink of an eye. She disappeared without any warning. Hoopa couldn't help but widen his tiger eyes. He turned to roar at Lu Yi. "Where's Yi? Where's the big Yi?" At this moment, Yi's small head suddenly popped out from the spot where she disappeared. She waved at Lu Yi and Hoopa and said, "Come in." Hoopa hurriedly scurried over to her. Lu Yi also walked over. The next moment, it was as if they had barged into an invisible barrier. When they stood still, their surroundings had changed. This was a foggy space. In terms of environmental feedback, it wasn't much different from standing on the Lotus Land. However, there was a great guarantee of privacy. Thinking back to Li Shang's words, Lu Yi suddenly understood. The Soul Clan lived on the Lotus Land, not on the surface of the petals. They could have their own small space inside the Lotus Land. This was undoubtedly the Soul Clan's home. The foggy space wasn't too big, but it wasn't small either. Lu Yi released his divine telekinesis and sensed that this space was about a few hundred feet in radius. It was definitely enough for just Yi and Hoopa to live here. As for how to decorate her home, that was something Yi had to consider. Of course, she didn't have to decorate it. In any case, it was enough for her to have her own space for cultivation. Yi was looking around her little home while Hoopa followed behind her eagerly. Lu Yi watched quietly. Speaking of which, the situation with the Soul Clan was somewhat different from what he had expected. He thought that the Soul Clan would be greatly shaken when Li Shang brought back a sacred beast like Hoopa. But in reality, after Li Shang returned, only the Soul Clan's patriarch showed up. He didn't seem to care too much about Hoopa. He even gave Li Shang a 5-colored token, allowing her to occupy a 5-colored Lotus Land. As for him, an outsider, the patriarch didn't seem to care either. According to Li Shang, flesh and blood couldn't enter this space, except for a sacred beast like Hoopa. Lu Yi didn't know why he could enter, but it probably had something to do with the innate skill tree's abnormal reaction. He hadn't dared to let Yi bring Hoopa to the Soul Clan's ancestral land because he was worried that if Yi wasn't by his side, no one would stand up for her if she was bullied. But now, it seemed that there wasn't much conflict on the Soul Clan's side. The entire Soul Clan's ancestral land was filled with an aura of peace and comfort. And this place was indeed suitable for a soul to grow. With Li Shang's care, and the immortal essence guards could take care of each other. Lu Yi sighed in his heart. If this was Yi's opportunity, it wouldn't be good for him to stop her. "Yi!" Lu Yi called out. Yi hurriedly jogged in front of Lu Yi. "What's wrong?" "Take this." Lu Yi took out a storage ring and handed it to her. Yi took it in confusion. After checking it, she looked up at Lu Yi emotionally. "I knew you were lying to me before." There was nothing else in the storage ring. It was filled with spirit refining pills, and they were all top-grade spirit refining pills. Yi naturally knew that Hua Ci and Shui Yuan had been using the pill gourd to refine treasure body pills and spirit refining pills. She was also one of the few people who knew about the existence of the pill gourd. Looking at the number of top-grade spirit refining pills, it was obvious that Lu Yi had brought all the pills that Hua Ci and Shui Yuan had refined. He said that she wasn't allowed to go to the Soul Clan's ancestral land. If he really didn't allow it, why would he prepare these things in advance? It was like a parent who didn't allow their child to go out and work alone. Although they said they didn't allow it, when the child set out, they would still stuff a lot of good things in the child's luggage, as if they wanted to empty the family's fortune. Lu Yi had a helpless expression on his face. He said seriously, "You can stay here, but you must be obedient and listen to big sister Li Shang. Don't cause trouble." He nodded her head like a chicken pecking at rice. Speaking of which, she wasn't the type to cause trouble. End of chapter. Chapter 1656. Once the immortal essence defenders were settled down, they were reborn and began to cultivate eagerly. Moreover, with Li Shang's guidance, they could begin to cultivate the secret techniques of the Spiritus. Correspondingly, without the restriction of the soul pool, their strength could grow like normal Spiritus. Lu Yi looked forward to the day when he would see them again. He wondered what kind of earth-shattering changes they would undergo. Yi was also cultivating in her own small space with Hoopa by her side. She seemed to be using this method to tell Lu Yi that she wouldn't waste her time. When they met again, she would definitely give Lu Yi a shock. Lu Yi wasn't in a hurry to leave the Spirita's ancestral land. Instead, he wandered around for a few days. Although he could sense that the Spiritas were peaceful, he still wanted to observe more. After a few days, Lu Yi discovered that this place was indeed very peaceful. There was basically no fighting. Most Spiritas were quietly waiting in their own lotus lands. A few wandered outside, but they all seemed carefree. The only thing that puzzled Lu Yi was that the Spiritas experts were very friendly to him. Over the past few days, Lu Yi had traveled to many lotus continents. Not just Yu Yao, he had even met several Spiritas from Rizhao. Although none of the Spiritas had any deep interactions with him, these Spiritas powerhouses were all very friendly when they met. This puzzled Lu Yi, but after thinking about it carefully, he realized that it might be because of Hoopa. Even though the leader of the Spiritas didn't express much when he saw Hoopa, Hoopa was still a sacred beast of the Spiritas, and he had a very close relationship with Hoopa. Perhaps the Spiritas loved Hoopa as much as they loved him? This kind of environment made Lu Yi feel very relieved. It was unlikely that Yi would be in any danger if she stayed in this place. Putting aside all his worries, Lu Yi returned to Li Shang's lotus land. He found Li Shang and bid her farewell. "Fellow Taoist, are you leaving now?" Li Shang asked. Lu Yi said, "I can't stay here forever. I still need to ask for fellow Taoist's guidance on how to leave." Li Shang said, "Then come with me to see the elder on duty. If the Spiritas want to leave the ancestral land, they can only do so if the elder on duty approves." She had snuck out before. She thought that she would be punished when she returned, but she didn't. Lu Yi glanced in the direction of Yi's home, then turned his head and said, "Let's go." There was no need to say goodbye. It would only add to his troubles. Following Li Shang, Shaochen flew to the lotus land where the elder on duty was. In just over 2 hours, they arrived at a 7-colored lotus land. There were only a limited number of rainbow lotuses in the entire ancestral land of the soul race. Only the soul race of sunshine had the right to occupy them. This 7-colored lotus land was not big. When Li Shang led Lu Yi to land here, the elder on duty clearly sensed it and took the initiative to show himself. Lu Yi looked up and saw an old man. He hurriedly bowed respectfully. Lu Yi of the 9 heavens greets Elder Su Yuan. Li Shang had already informed him of the elder's name in advance. Although Su Yuan had heard of Lu Ye's existence from Hun Ke, this was the first time he had seen him. He could not help but observe him carefully. He was really curious as to how such a weak human could trigger the will of the ancestral land and make the will of the ancestral land pass down such an order. He couldn't really be the reincarnation of that almighty being, right? That was just too ridiculous. Putting away his thoughts, Su Yuan chuckled. My soul race rarely receives guests. Little friend, you're the first one since ancient times. Please forgive me for disturbing you. Lu Yi blushed with shame. Speaking of which, he should not have entered uninvited. However, this was not his fault. At that time, he only wanted to take Hupu out. Who knew that he would be wrapped in the lotus and brought here? He was forced to do so. Su Yuan said, "It's fine. It's not that my soul race does not welcome outsiders. It's just that the ancestral land has never accepted outsiders. Little friend, you must be extraordinary to be able to enter the ancestral land." He secretly probed, wanting to know why Lu Yi was accepted by the ancestral land. However, Lu Yi clearly had no intention of explaining. He could not mention the talent tree to others. Moreover, he could not explain why the talent tree could resonate with the soul race's ancestral land. Su Yuan was helpless when he saw that Lu Yi did not answer. He could only ask, "Little friend, what brings you here?" Lu Yi said, "Elder, please forgive me. I want to leave here, so I hope Elder can make things convenient." Su Yuan was stunned when he heard this. Lu Yi wanted to leave? How could that be? The soul race had not taken care of him yet. There were still a few days before the lotus pond opened. He naturally could not let Lu Yi leave now. Hearing that, Su Yuan immediately revealed a difficult expression. If it were normal times, little friend wants to leave, there's no problem. But now, it's a little difficult. Why? Lu Yi frowned slightly. Su Yuan said, "Not hiding from little friend, my ancestral land's lotus pond is about to open. During this period, the ancestral land space can't be entered or exited." Li Shang said curiously by the side, "There's such a thing?" Why had she not heard of it? Su Yuan glared at her. "If this old man says so, then say it. Don't interrupt. The matter of leaving the ancestral land without permission, I haven't settled the score with you yet. According to the rules, he, the elder on duty, could punish Li Shang who violated the clan's rules while he was on duty. Even confining her for 10 to 20 years was no problem." Sensing Elder Su Yuan's unkind eyes, Li Shang hurriedly shut up. Although Elder Su Yuan had always treated people amiably, Li Shang kept feeling that he was somewhat strange today. Furthermore, the lotus pond was actually about to open. Calculating the time, it should not be time yet. Lu Yi said, "Then how long do we have to wait?" Su Yuan said, "Not long, not long. The lotus pond opens in a few days, and then closes in a few days. At that time, little friend can leave." That was nothing. It was nothing more than staying here for a few more days. This bit of time, Lu Yi could still afford to wait. He was just about to say that he would come again after the lotus pond closed in a few days, but Su Yuan suddenly chuckled and said, "Little friend, are you interested in participating in my soul clan's lotus pond struggle?" Lu Yi was still unclear about what the lotus pond struggle represented. But when Li Shang heard this, she could not help revealing a shocked expression. Elder Suyun was muddle-headed, right? The lotus pond struggle had always been a major event on the Soul Clan side. Furthermore, the spots had always been limited. The Soul Clan itself did not have enough. Now, it was actually going to be given to an outsider? She naturally did not have any objections to Lu Yi. She was just very shocked that Elder Su Yuan would say such words. Lu Yi was also quite surprised. "I can participate?" Su Yuan smiled and said, "As my Soul Clan's first guest since ancient times, you can." Pausing for a moment, he opened his mouth and said, "If little friend is interested in participating, later when the lotus pond opens, let Li Shang bring you over. You can also understand what the lotus pond struggle is from her. This old man still has important matters here and won't keep you company first." Originally, he was still not very anxious about opening the lotus pond. But Lu Yi wanted to leave now, so he naturally had to make the best use of his time. He had to hurry up and contact several old friends to open the lotus pond. Lu Yi left together with Li Shang again. He felt that Li Shang's gaze when looking at him was strange. Although he did not understand why, he was certain that it had something to do with that lotus pond struggle. And through Li Shang's explanation, only then did Lu Yi understand what the lotus pond struggle was. There was a treasure land in the Soul Clan's ancestral land, that was the lotus pond. Inside the lotus pond would give birth to a kind of peculiar divine lotus. If the Soul Clan could refine and subdue it, it would have tremendous benefits to their own growth. It could be said that every Soul Clan member had a dream to refine a divine lotus. But since ancient times, all the Soul Clan members who had the qualifications to enter the lotus pond were those with the greatest aptitudes. Li Shang herself had never obtained such qualifications, so every time the lotus pond opened, she could only watch helplessly. The qualifications to enter the lotus pond were extremely precious among the Soul Clan. Almost every Soul Clan member who entered the lotus pond would gain something. If they could successfully refine a divine lotus, they would benefit for the rest of their lives. Listening to Li Shang's explanation, Lu Yi could not help but be stunned. He really could not understand why Elder Su Yuan would let him participate in such an important event for the Soul Clan. He did not want to measure the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain and maliciously speculate about others, but this matter was a bit ridiculous. If he participated, the Soul Clan would have one less spot. But thinking about it, even if Su Yuan had some ulterior motives, there was no need for him to do this. Could it be because of Hu Pe? But if that was the case, this spot should have been given to Yi. Why would it be given to him? Since he could not understand, he could only go take a look when the time came. If there really was something wrong with the lotus pond, with the uniqueness of his talent tree, he should be able to detect it. Lu Yi stayed in peace for a few more days. In these days, the Soul Clan's ancestral land was clearly much livelier. Outside the lotus pond, there were many Soul Clan members coming and going. This was something Lu Yi had not seen before, clearly because the lotus pond had opened. According to Li Shang, every time the lotus pond opened, the Soul Clan would be very lively. Because the ancestral land was too peaceful, nothing major happened. So when the lotus pond opened, everyone could go and watch the show. Lu Yi was speechless. He increasingly understood just how boring life was here. Thinking about it, although this place was peaceful and quiet, it also lost a lot of excitement. When it was lively, it was naturally very attractive. Several days later, a group of figures set off from the five-colored lotus pond. Not only were there Li Shang and Lu Yi, but Yi and Hu Per also came. Yi would likely live here for a long time in the future. Although she did not have a spot for the lotus pond this time, she could fight for it next time. There was no harm in taking a look in advance. What delighted Li Shang was that she actually had a spot to enter the lotus pond this time. Logically speaking, she did not have this qualification. Thinking about it, he felt that it was probably because he had brought back the holy beast and performed a great merit, so Elder Su Yuan had rewarded him with this spot. In truth, there was no need for Li Shang to lead the way. Because along the way, Lu Yi saw many Soul Clan members heading in the same direction. That was undoubtedly where the lotus pond was. Wherever they went, they attracted the attention of countless Soul Clan members, causing a great commotion. Even if they had never seen the white tiger, the Soul Clan knew of the existence of the holy beast. But the previous generation's holy beast had died 10,000 years ago. So, the Soul Clan members never imagined that there would be a holy beast in the ancestral land. On the other hand, Lu Ye's existence did not attract too much attention from the Soul Clan. On the surface, the Soul Clan looked similar to the human race. If Lu Yi did not circulate his spirit energy, the weaker Soul Clan members would not be able to see any clues. End of chapter. Chapter 1657. When Lu Yi and the others arrived at the lotus pond, there were already many Soul Race clansmen gathered here. The lotus pond was said to be at the center of the Soul Race's ancestral land. When they arrived, it caused a commotion among the Soul Race clansmen. Countless pairs of eyes looked towards Hu Po with surprise and suspicion. The name of the holy beast began to spread among the clansmen, causing many Soul Race clansmen to be shocked and excited. Li Shang led Lu Yi and the others to a relatively empty spot and waited. Looking up, Lu Yi saw the lotus pond. He thought that since it was named a pond, it would be similar to the Soul Pond in Immortal Essence City, but when he saw the lotus pond, he realized he was wrong. This lotus pond was not a pond at all, but a giant lotus that had not fully bloomed. Lu Yi had a strange expression. The things in the soul race's ancestral land were really interesting. Everything seemed to be related to lotuses. This was clearly not because the soul race liked it, but because it was a specialty of the ancestral land. This giant lotus that had not yet bloomed was many times larger than any lotus pond Lu Yi had seen before. And this was still in its unbloomed state. If it bloomed, who knew how big it would be? At this moment, there were 7 or 8 figures hovering around this giant lotus, each of them surging with soul power. These figures were all Rizhao soul race clansmen. Lu Yi only recognized Elder Su Yuan. He had never seen the others before. The soul race patriarch was also present, but Han Ke only stood to the side with his hands behind his back, not doing anything else. It was only when Lu Yi and the others arrived that he sensed something and glanced in their direction. I knew it. It's not time for the lotus pond to open yet. Li Shang glanced over and immediately said, "It's not time for the lotus pond to open yet?" Lu Yi revealed a confused expression. Li Shang nodded, calculating the time. The lotus pond should open at least 2 years from now. Looking at the situation, it's clear that the elders are opening the lotus pond early. She then revealed a confused expression, but why? To the Spiritas, 2 years was not a long time. This was because the Spiritas had an advantage in terms of lifespan compared to most races in the universe. Opening the lotus pond in advance was not an easy task. The elders present had to put in a lot of effort. As he spoke, the soul power around the soul race's Rizhao became even more ferocious. Someone exclaimed, "The lotus pond is open." As the voice rang out, the huge budding lotus flower slowly unfurled its petals. As the petals unfurled, brilliant purples and reds refracted, causing the entire space to become colorful. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the giant lotus finally bloomed. The Sunshine Soul clan members looked as if they had just fought a great battle. Their expressions were weak, and even the soul power that was surging fiercely around them had become very weak. Opening the lotus pond in advance was indeed very taxing on them. Fortunately, we have accomplished our mission. The soul race elders, led by Su Yuan, arrived in front of Han Ke and said solemnly. Han Ke nodded. "Thank you for your hard work. Please go back and rest. Leave the rest to me." Su Yuan chuckled. "There's no rush. Let's wait and see." He was really curious as to how the constellation realm human was able to trigger the will of the ancestral land. As a human, would he be able to benefit from the lotus pond? After all, no other race had ever entered the lotus pond. Hence, even the knowledgeable Sunshine Soul clan members did not know what would happen if a human entered the lotus pond. In short, there was no danger. Since Su Yuan thought so, the other Sunshine Soul clan members naturally thought so too. Hence, the Sunshine Soul clan members who should have gone back to rest did not leave. They all stayed behind to watch the show. It was not just the ordinary Soul clan members who liked to watch the show. The Sunshine Soul clan members also liked to watch the show. It was mainly because life in the Soul clan's ancestral land was too boring. Usually, nothing big happened here. Han Ke did not mind. He shook his soul power slightly and said loudly, "The return of the sacred beast is a celebration for my race. Today, the lotus pond will be opened to nourish my race. Those who are qualified to enter the lotus pond, quickly enter. The lotus pond will be open for 3 days. Whether you can benefit from it will depend on your luck." As soon as Han Ke finished speaking, figures immediately flew out from the crowd and entered the lotus pond. Clearly, they were all qualified to enter the lotus pond. Li Shang revealed a look of understanding. It turned out that the lotus pond was opened in advance because of the return of the sacred beast. To the Soul clan, this was indeed a joyous occasion. It was worth opening the lotus pond in advance to celebrate. As the clansman who brought back the sacred beast, of course, he was qualified to enter the lotus pond. She was filled with excitement and anticipation. "Let's go in too." Lu Yi nodded and instructed Yi, "Wait for me here." Yi nodded obediently. "Go." Then, Lu Yi followed Li Shang and flew toward the lotus pond. He had already asked Li Shang about the lotus pond before, so he naturally knew what he should do. However, he did not expect to hear a voice at this time. After entering the lotus pond, connect your mind to the sacred lotus. The more colorful the sacred lotus is, the higher the quality of the sacred lotus. It will be more beneficial for your future cultivation. Choose carefully. The voice sounded familiar. It should be Hun Ke who was transmitting his voice to him. Lu Yi looked up and saw the Soul Clan leader looking at him. He nodded slightly to express his gratitude. He sighed in his heart. The Soul Clan was really good. Elder Su Yuan allowed him to participate in the competition for the Lotus Pond, and the Soul Clan leader personally gave him pointers. Although he had already understood the situation from Li Shang, it was still good intentions to give him pointers. In an instant, Lu Yi and Li Shang entered the Lotus Pond together. The main body of the Lotus Pond was an enormous blooming lotus flower. From afar, it appeared to be a lotus-shaped pond filled with water. However, only upon entering the pond would one realize that the water in the pond was no ordinary water. Instead, it was formed by the condensation of pure soul power. It was similar to the water of the 10,000 Elephant Sea, but the difference was that one was condensed from soul power, while the other was condensed from starry sky energy. What was even more different was that the water of the 10,000 Elephant Sea had thick impurities and was extremely corrosive, but the water in the lotus pond did not have these drawbacks. When Lu Yi entered, he immediately felt that he was wrapped in a gentle force. His entire body was filled with an indescribable comfort, and his mind instantly reached an extremely transparent state. It was as if his divine soul had turned into the purest jade in the world, untainted by even a speck of dust. This was a very strange state. Lu Yi had never experienced it before. He vaguely felt that if a cultivator could cultivate in this state, whether it was comprehending secret techniques or refining spirit jades, their efficiency would be greatly improved. He instinctively tried to refine the pond water around him and found that he could actually refine and absorb it. The effect was even not inferior to taking a top-grade spirit refining pill. This could undoubtedly strengthen his divine soul. In this way, even if he did not obtain the divine lotus after entering the lotus pond, he would not be left empty-handed. The lotus pond had been open for 3 days. To be able to cultivate in such a place for 3 days was a rare experience for any Soul Clan member. "Let's split up," Li Shang said. Lu Yi nodded, and Li Shang immediately rushed in a direction. To enter the lotus pond, one needed to refine the divine lotus, so it was naturally not good to move together. After all, if they really found a good divine lotus, who would it belong to? They could not fight first, after all. After Li Shang left, Lu Yi looked left and right. He did not see the so-called divine lotus, but he was not in a hurry. Although he was very interested in the divine lotus, it was said that it was still very difficult to refine the divine lotus. It was not easy for even the Soul Clan members to refine the divine lotus. Usually, out of 100 Soul Clan members who entered the lotus pond, it was not bad if 10 of them could refine the divine lotus. He was a human. Although he had obtained the right to enter the lotus pond, he was not sure if he could refine the divine lotus. At this moment, he was very interested in the pond water that enveloped him. Ordinary Soul Clan members who entered this place would be busy searching for the divine lotus and probably would not have the time to refine the pond water here, but he could. The talent tree itself had a powerful devouring effect. It could even devour and refine the seawater of the 10,000 Elephant Sea, let alone the water of the lotus pond here. He had given all the top-grade spirit refining pills he had brought from the 3-world island to. The effect of refining the pond water here was no different from taking a top-grade spirit refining pill. Naturally, he could not miss this opportunity. He immediately activated the talent tree's power. His body seemed to have turned into a bottomless pit as he devoured and refined the pond water hungrily. Lu Yi was happy because he realized that the talent tree's reaction was very small. When he refined the 10,000 Elephant Sea seawater, the talent tree looked like it was burning trash. Black smoke rose into the sky. However, when he refined the pond water here, there were no traces of impurities being burned. In other words, this kind of refining did not consume the talent tree's fuel at all. Moreover, he only needed to maintain the talent tree's power. It did not take much effort. The talent tree's power was activated, and it continued to refine and devour the water of the lotus pond. Lu Yi could clearly feel the power of his divine soul slowly strengthening. Only then did he leisurely walk in a certain direction. Above the lotus pond, many Sunshine Clan members of the Soul Clan were gathered. Hun Kei was the leader, and there were 7 or 8 elders. They were all observing the situation below with interest. With their strength, they could naturally see everything that was happening in the lotus pond. When Lu Yi activated the talent tree's power to devour and refine the pond water, the Sunshine Clan members could not help but twitch their eyes. Su Yuan frowned and said, "What kind of technique is this?" It was understandable that the Soul Clan members who entered the lotus pond could refine the pond water to improve themselves. Since Lu Yi was allowed to enter, he could naturally do the same. Anyway, the water in the lotus pond was huge. Even if some constellations entered and refined and absorbed the water, they would not consume much of it. However, when Lu Yi made his move, the Sunshine Clan members of the Soul Clan felt that something was wrong. This refining speed seemed to be abnormal. The key was that they did not understand how Lu Yi was doing it. Even if they were Sunshine Clan members who entered the lotus pond to cultivate, the efficiency would probably only be so. This was unbelievable. End of chapter. Chapter 1658. Hun Kei shook his head. He also did not understand what technique that was. However, as expected of someone who could trigger the will of the ancestral land, it was indeed miraculous. The will of the ancestral land had instructed him to take good care of Hun Quebec. After thinking about it, Hun Kei could only open the lotus pond and let Hun Kei benefit from it. Otherwise, Hun Kei would be suspicious if he directly gave Hun Kei a treasure. Although this human's efficiency of refining the pond water was terrifying, the foundation of the lotus pond was also extraordinary. Even if there were losses in 3 days, it would not be a big impact. Lu Yi strolled around leisurely. Not long after, a strange color appeared in front of him. He quickly approached it and saw a small lotus quietly floating not far away. The lotus was 2-colored, purple and white. It was a 2-colored divine lotus. The divine lotuses in the lotus pond were also divided into grades. According to Li Shang, there were single-colored divine lotuses to 5-colored ones. The more colors there were, the fewer divine lotuses there were. Every time the lotus pond opened, there would only be 2 or 3 5-colored divine lotuses. The most common ones were the single-colored and 2-colored ones. However, it was not easy for the soul race to refine the single-colored and 2-colored divine lotuses. Therefore, every time the soul race entered the lotus pond, only 10% of them would gain something. Most of them only increased their strength slightly because of the lotus pond, but did not obtain a divine lotus. Lu Yi felt that since he had coincidentally encountered the opening of the lotus pond and was allowed to enter, if he could refine the divine lotus, he naturally had to have some goals. He did not want the rare 5-colored divine lotus. He had to at least hope for the 4-colored divine lotus. At the very least, the 3-colored divine lotus would do. He naturally did not care about the 2-colored divine lotus. However, it was his first time encountering a divine lotus. Lu Yi tried to connect with it with his mind to see if he could refine it. It would be fine if he could not refine it. However, if he could, it meant that he was qualified to obtain a divine lotus here. His divine thought surged and spread out in front of him. Soon, it wrapped around the divine lotus that was quietly floating in the pond water. Then, Lu Yi felt his divine thought seep into the divine lotus without any obstruction. He could not help but be startled. Why was the situation different from what Li Shang had said? Didn't they say it was difficult to refine the divine lotus? Didn't they say that only 10 out of 100 soul race members would gain something? Logically speaking, it should not be so easy to refine the divine lotus. But in reality, he hadn't even exerted any force yet, and there were already signs of refinement. At this moment, Lu Yi could clearly feel that if he continued to use his divine sense to seep into this 2-colored divine lotus, he could easily refine it and store it in his divine sea. This was a little awkward. He was just trying it out. Moreover, the 2-colored divine lotus was not his goal. If this divine lotus was 4-colored or 5-colored, Lu Yi would definitely accept it. Even if it was three-colored, he still had to consider it. After all, if he missed this opportunity, there might not be another one. But in the end, it was only two colors. The quality was a little too low. After hesitating for a moment, Lu Yi decided to give up on this divine lotus and look for a better one. As Lu Yi withdrew his divine sense, something unexpected occurred. As he withdrew his divine sense, there was also a two-colored flowing light. The stream of light was formed from the divine lotus, and it shot straight towards him as if it was being pulled back by his own divine sense. No matter how fast Lu Ye's reaction was, he couldn't react faster than the withdrawal of his spiritual sense. By the time he reacted, the two-colored stream of light had already disappeared. He stood there in a daze for a long time, unable to react. Above the lotus pond, Hun Kei and the group of Spirita's elders were also stunned. In the past, no one had been able to harvest from the lotus pond so quickly. After all, refining a divine lotus was not an easy task. It required time and soul power. But what did they just see? Lu Yi saw a two-colored divine lotus. Lu Yi glanced at the two-colored divine lotus, and then, the two-colored divine lotus was refined. Hun Kei frowned. He had already reminded this kid to choose carefully, but he actually chose a two-colored one. Although there were no five-colored divine lotuses in the lotus pond, there were still four-colored ones. If not, he could have chosen a three-colored one. Why did he choose a two-colored one? The ancestral lands will wanted him to take care of this kid. He didn't hesitate to open the lotus pond in advance, and this was the result. He didn't know if the ancestral lands would be satisfied. Hun Kei felt a headache coming on. He was already considering whether to give Lu Yi a treasure before he left. But treasures were just external forces. How could they compare to the divine lotus? The divine lotus was a treasure that could increase a cultivator's foundation. It belonged to the Spiritas. Very powerful. An elder praised. Don't look at the two-colored divine lotus. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this refining speed was the fastest since ancient times. It was a pity that this human didn't choose carefully. In the lotus pond, Lu Ye's face was dark. He was just trying it. He didn't want to refine the two-colored divine lotus at all. How did things become like this? Was it really so easy to refine a divine lotus? If so, then Li Shang wouldn't have told him those things before. Lu Yi thought about it and felt that this was related to his choice. The lower the quality of the divine lotus, the easier it would be to refine it. If he had chosen a three-colored or four-colored one, it wouldn't have been so easy. But this was the first divine lotus he had encountered. There was no room for choice. Now that things had come to this, it was useless to be upset. Lu Yi could only immerse his mind and check his divine sea. Sure enough, he found that there was an additional two-colored divine lotus in his divine sea. It was exactly the same as the one he saw before. Lu Yi also felt something strange. After calming his mind and experiencing it for a while, Lu Yi found that this two-colored divine lotus in his divine sea was actually slowly absorbing his soul force. But at the same time, more soul power escaped from the flower and filled his divine sea. The entire divine lotus was like a transfer point. Every time his soul force flowed through it, it would grow stronger. Sure enough, as Li Shang said, divine lotuses were magical and had the effect of nourishing the soul. In other words, with this divine lotus in his divine sea, even if Lu Yi didn't do anything, his soul force would slowly grow along with the effects of the divine lotus. This was a strange and gentle nourishment. To a cultivator, there were only benefits and no disadvantages. One might not be able to see any clues in a short time, but after a long time, one's soul force would definitely be much stronger than cultivators in the same realm. Anyone could understand the benefits of a powerful soul force. This kind of treasure that could slowly nourish the soul force was a rare treasure even in the entire starry sky. But the more he realized the preciousness of the divine lotus, the more Lu Ye's heart ached. This was just a two-colored one. If it was a three-colored one, four-colored one, what about a five-colored one? He could refine a two-colored one so easily, so maybe he could refine a higher quality one. If he had known this would happen, he would have tried to find a higher quality one. But there was no medicine for regret in this world. Lu Yi couldn't have known in advance that this would be the result. Since things had come to this, he could only accept his fate. Taking a step back, this was a free treasure after all. It was already good enough to have it, so how could he ask for more? Forcing himself to comfort himself, Lu Yi felt slightly relieved. The lotus pond had been open for 3 days. This was just the beginning, but for Lu Yi, it was already over. Of course, he didn't plan to leave so soon. His innate skill tree devoured the pond water here, which was very beneficial to the strength of his soul. This pond water was equivalent to the melted top-grade spirit refining pill, so he naturally couldn't let it go. No longer looking for divine lotuses, Yang Kai calmly refined the pond water here. Suddenly, a strange light appeared not far away. When Lu Yi turned his head to look, he saw 2 light dots entwined and a divine lotus slowly emerged. Another 2-colored divine lotus. However, it was different from the divine lotus he had refined earlier. This one was black and white. Lu Yi glanced at it and subconsciously urged his divine sense to spread over there. In the next instant, Lu Yi was stunned for a moment because he felt his divine sense seep into the divine lotus without any obstruction, exactly the same as what happened just now. His heart jumped, thinking to himself that it wasn't too possible, right? He withdrew his divine sense. Immediately after, an incomprehensible scene happened. Following the withdrawal of his divine sense, there was also a 2-colored stream of light. Lu Yi couldn't help being stunned. He swore that he absolutely didn't have any improper thoughts about this second 2-colored divine lotus. He just purely wanted to see what was the difference between it and the one he had just collected. After all, the colors looked a little different. Furthermore, Li Shang told him that the soul race could only collect 1 divine lotus in their lifetime. It was absolutely impossible to collect a second one. But this was exactly what had happened in such a strange way. It was truly ridiculous. After the surprise, Lu Yi hurriedly checked his divine sea. His mind was immersed, and his soul body was exposed. Staring, Lu Yi could not help being stunned. Where was the second 2-colored divine lotus? Where was that big divine lotus? He clearly refined it and stored it in his divine sea just now, but where was the second 2-colored divine lotus here? There was only 1 2-colored divine lotus in his divine sea. But soon, Lu Yi realized that something was wrong. Compared to before, the 2-colored divine lotus in his divine sea seemed to have some subtle changes. It was originally purple and white, but upon closer inspection, there seemed to be some other colors. However, the colors were very faint. If one didn't look carefully, they would not be able to notice it at all. Furthermore, the 2-colored divine lotus's soul-nourishing effect seemed to have become a little stronger. Lu Yi could not help but think of a possibility, and his mind became active. Above the lotus pond, Elder Su Yuan rubbed his eyes hard. The other Sunshine Soul Race members also widened their eyes. What did they see just now? That human called Lu Ye actually refined another divine lotus? Didn't he just refine one? How could he refine a second one? Patriarch. Elder Su Yuan could not help but look at Hun Quebec. Hun K's expression was not too shocked, but his eyes were also filled with an incomprehensible look. Logically speaking, it was common knowledge that only 1 divine lotus could be refined. Since ancient times, no soul race clansman had ever refined a second divine lotus. If it was the case for the soul race, it should be the same for the human race. This had nothing to do with race. After thinking about it, Hun Ke could only think of one possibility. He said solemnly, "The will of the ancestral land." End of chapter. Chapter 1659. Since ancient times, no flesh and blood other than sacred beasts could enter the ancestral land. This was not because of the ancestral land itself, but because of the ancestral land's will. If the ancestral land's will did not allow flesh and blood to enter, then flesh and blood could not enter. If the ancestral land's will allowed Lu Yi to enter, then Lu Yi could enter. By the same logic, if the ancestral land's will allowed it, Lu Yi could naturally refine the second divine lotus because the divine lotuses were the embodiment of the ancestral land's will. Hun Ke looked in the direction of Lu Yi in the lotus pond. He could not see what was so special about this human that the ancestral lands would treat him like this. However, the fact that he could enter the ancestral land and refine the second divine lotus proved that something was wrong. Hun Ke watched with interest. He faintly felt that refining the two divine lotuses was not the end. It might just be the beginning. In the lotus pond, Lu Yi confirmed one thing. Although he had refined two divine lotuses, there was actually only one in his deity sea. However, that divine lotus seemed to have undergone some wonderful changes. In that case, if he refined more divine lotuses, would the two-colored divine lotus in his deity sea undergo a greater change? Perhaps it could become three-colored? Originally, after refining one divine lotus, Lu Yi did not have many thoughts. He only wanted to stay here for 3 days to refine some of the pond water and strengthen his soul. But now that he had made such a discovery, he immediately became excited. His figure flashed and flew in a certain direction. Not long after, a speck of light appeared in front of him. When he got closer, he saw that it was a monochromatic divine lotus. Lu Yi did not mind and immediately spread his divine perception over it, just like before. His divine perception entered the divine lotus smoothly. When he withdrew it, the divine lotus was also pulled into his deity sea. Upon closer inspection, there was still a two-colored divine lotus in his deity sea. However, compared to before, there was a slight change. As expected, it was just as he thought. The divine lotus in his deity sea could merge with other divine lotuses and evolve to a higher quality. In an instant, his vexation from only refining a single two-colored divine lotus vanished. Since he could use this method to make the divine lotus evolve, then there was nothing to be vexed about. As long as he refined enough divine lotuses, then the quality of the divine lotus he obtained in the end would definitely be more than two-colored. He continued his search in high spirits. There were quite a few divine lotuses in the lotus pond. Furthermore, they were still in the process of being nurtured. Basically, Lu Yi could find a new divine lotus every once in a while. However, as Li Shang had said before, most of the divine lotuses in the lotus pond were not of high quality, so the ones he encountered were basically single or two-colored. In an hour, Lu Yi had already refined about 10 god lotuses. When the 10th god lotus was refined, he clearly felt some strange changes in his spirit sea. He hurriedly immersed himself in observing. He saw that the two-colored divine lotus in his deity sea was emitting a three-colored light. In addition to the purple and white light from before, there was also a hint of black. It really became a tri-colored divine lotus. In comparison, the three-colored divine lotus was much more effective in nourishing one's soul than the two-colored divine lotus. After his soul power was nourished by the three-colored divine lotus, the feedback he received was much clearer and stronger. And this was only 3 colors. What if it was 4 or 5 colors? Lu Ye's heart was burning. He never thought that he would encounter such an opportunity when he was just sending Li Shang back to the ancestral land. Such benefits were probably impossible to encounter in the Soul Clan's ancestral land. In the entire universe, he probably would not encounter such benefits again. In 2 hours, the two-colored divine lotus had turned into a three-colored divine lotus. The lotus pond would only open for 3 days. If he wanted to transform his divine lotus into a 5-colored divine lotus, it would be a long and arduous journey. Lu Yi hurriedly took action. Wherever he passed, the single or two-colored divine lotuses were constantly refined. Hun Ke and the Soul Clan Sunshine Elders who were watching from above the lotus pond were dumbfounded. They had lived for so many years, but they had never seen such a strange thing. Even if Hun Ke said that this was the will of the ancestral land, they still found it hard to accept. The ancestral land was the Soul Clan's ancestral land. However, even the most talented Soul Clan member could only refine one divine lotus after entering the lotus pond. Just like them, who could cultivate to Sunshine Sect, were all monstrous talents. They had all entered the lotus pond before, and each of them had a 5-colored divine lotus in their deity seas. However, even they could not refine a second divine lotus when they entered the lotus pond back then. A human could actually do it. The will of the ancestral land was just too biased. Of course, they only dared to have such thoughts in their minds. They did not dare to say it out loud. Su Yuan was now somewhat certain that this human named Lu Ye was either the reincarnation of that mighty figure or was related to that mighty figure. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to receive such preferential treatment from the Soul Clan's ancestral land. The possibility of the former was very low, so it was very likely that it was the latter. While observing the three-colored divine lotus, Lu Yi continued to refine many divine lotuses. However, to the three-colored divine lotus, the improvement brought by the single and two-colored divine lotus was not as obvious as before. Lu Yi realized that if he wanted the three-colored divine lotus to evolve as soon as possible, he had to find higher-quality divine lotuses. It would be best if he could find a five-colored divine lotus. Unfortunately, there were only 2 or 3 five-colored divine lotuses in the entire lotus pond. The lotus pond itself was extremely huge. It was very difficult to find a five-colored divine lotus here. He did not find a five-colored divine lotus, but he finally found a three-colored divine lotus. He followed the three-colored divine lotus to a three-colored divine lotus and saw a Soul Clan cultivator attempting to refine it. When the Soul Clan cultivator saw Lu Yi arrive, he clearly became nervous. This was because one could attack each other in the lotus pond. It was not a place where one could coexist peacefully. After all, there were only a few five-colored divine lotuses. If they were discovered by many Soul Clan cultivators at the same time, then whoever had the bigger fist would have the qualifications to refine it. Moreover, refining and absorbing the divine lotus itself required some time, and this even increased the possibility of a battle between them. The Soul Clan cultivators that entered the lotus pond were all at the constellation realm. The Soul Clan cultivators' soul power fluctuations were clearly at the late-stage constellation realm. When he saw Lu Yi arrive, he continued to refine the divine lotus in front of him while remaining vigilant. Lu Yi stood not far away, quietly watching and waiting. He was a guest in the end. The host was willing to let him participate in the lotus pond competition out of goodwill. Moreover, he had already gained something. If this three-colored divine lotus was ownerless, he would naturally refine it. Now that there was a soul orb eyeing it, it would not be good to snatch it. Wait and see. What if the other party could not refine it? It was said that it was very difficult for the Soul Clan to refine divine lotuses. It was unknown whether it was because of the pressure of Lu Ye's arrival or because the Soul Clan cultivator's opportunity had yet to arrive, but after a long time, he still could not refine the three-colored divine lotus. He was annoyed and could not help but glare at Lu Yi. "What are you looking at?" Lu Yi smiled at him and did not say anything. He had already shown enough goodwill. If the other party was unreasonable, then they could only fight it out. Fortunately, the Soul Clan cultivator was not unreasonable and had no intention of fighting with Lu Yi. After confirming that he could not refine the three-colored divine lotus, he said, "If you want to try, then try. In any case, you may not be able to refine it." When Lu Yi heard this, he stepped forward. Then deference is no substitute for obedience. The Spiritas dodged to the side and saw Lu Yi standing in front of the tricolored divine lotus. He glanced at the divine lotus and vaguely sensed traces of divine sense surging from Lu Ye's body. In the next instant, the tricolored divine lotus transformed into a stream of light and vanished. Lu Yi nodded slightly at the Soul Clan cultivator. "Thank you." He stepped forward and left. The Soul Clan cultivator was left dumbfounded as he watched his figure gradually disappear into the distance. What just happened? The three-colored divine lotus that he could not refine after spending so much effort was actually casually refined by someone else? From start to finish, it had only taken 1 or 2 breaths of time. He could not believe his eyes. Damn it, why was it so easy for others to obtain their opportunities while it was so difficult for him? He quickly calmed himself down. What was a three-colored divine lotus? Being able to refine a 4-colored divine lotus was a true opportunity. He was just testing his skills just now. Just because he could not refine a 3-colored divine lotus did not mean that he could not refine a 4-colored divine lotus. Perhaps there was an even better opportunity waiting for him. After forcibly comforting himself, the Soul Clan cultivator angrily left. At this moment, Lu Yi was inspecting the divine lotus in his divine sea. Sure enough, after refining a three-colored divine lotus, the original three-colored divine lotus in his divine sea had changed a lot. It was clearly showing signs of evolving into a four-colored divine lotus. Lu Yi felt that at this rate, as long as he refined 3 or 4 more three-colored divine lotuses, it should be able to evolve. In this lotus pond, 4-colored divine lotuses were not easy to find, but there were still many 3-colored divine lotuses. His goal, the 5-colored divine lotus, Lu Yi was confident that he could achieve it within 3 days. At this time, the Soul Clan cultivators who were watching the competition in the lotus pond were already numb. The word bias appeared in their hearts. Because they'd noticed one thing, and it was that the newly born divine lotuses in the lotus pond were basically revolving around Lu Yi, and many of them would appear on the path he had to take. This also meant that he could constantly encounter newly born divine lotuses and take them for his own use. If someone said that the ancestral lands was not secretly helping him, they would not believe it even if they were beaten to death. Since the lotus pond opened until now, it had only been 4 hours, but this kid had already refined more than 100 divine lotuses. He still did not look satisfied and was obviously looking around. But what was the use of refining so many divine lotuses? Logically speaking, even if 1 divine lotus was not enough for one person, 3 to 5 divine lotuses should be enough. 100 divine lotuses? He could not possibly be thinking of giving them away, right? That would be too much. Biased, too biased. One of the elders couldn't hold it in any longer and muttered softly. This was because he realized that in front of Lu Yi, there was actually a 4-colored divine lotus that was rapidly growing. Previously, it was still okay. The divine lotuses that were growing near Lu Yi were only single or double-colored. There was not even a 3-colored divine lotus. Now, there was a 4-colored divine lotus. Just give him a 5-colored divine lotus. End of chapter. Chapter 1660. Be careful with your words. Hun Kei said indifferently. It was all thanks to the ancestral lands that the Soul Clan had been able to live in such a peaceful environment since ancient times. The divine lotus was the embodiment of the ancestral land's will, so it could naturally give it to whoever it wanted. However, that was the reason. Seeing the movements in the lotus pond, even Hun Kei could not help but feel that the ancestral lands was a little biased. No Soul Clan member had ever received such treatment. In the lotus pond, Lu Yi saw the 4-colored light flowing in front of him. How could he not know that he had hit the jackpot? This was the first time he had seen a divine lotus above 3 colors. When he got closer, it was indeed a 4-colored divine lotus. He immediately spread out his divine sense and the 4-colored divine lotus disappeared. He had just refined the 4-colored divine lotus when he sensed an aura sweeping over from nearby. Soon the aura arrived. Lu Yi fixed his eyes on it. Coincidentally, it was the Soul Clan cultivator he had met before. When the Soul Clan cultivator saw Lu Yi, he could not help but be startled. Clearly, he had not expected to meet him again so soon. He naturally did not have a good impression of Lu Yi. He wanted to ignore him, but he could not suppress his curiosity and asked, "Is there a 4-colored divine lotus growing here?" Lu Yi shook his head calmly. The Soul Clan cultivator looked at him suspiciously. He seemed to have seen a 4-colored light just now, but why did it disappear all of a sudden? It was obviously impossible for the person in front of him to have refined it. He had just refined a 3-colored divine lotus right under his nose. How could he have refined a 4-colored one? Looking at it this way, he was afraid that his eyes were playing tricks on him. The Soul Clan cultivator was not interested in conversing with Lu Yi, so he quickly left. Lu Yi was already excitedly inspecting his spirit sea. He discovered that the original 3-colored divine lotus had become 4-colored. Moreover, it was in a state where it was evolving toward 5-colored. This undoubtedly meant that his initial guess was correct. As long as he continued to refine it, he would definitely obtain a 5-colored divine lotus in the end. At this moment, the 4-colored divine lotus in his spirit sea was undoubtedly much better than the 2-colored divine lotus in the beginning. Lu Yi could not help but look forward to the effects of the five-colored divine lotus. He continued to move forward. He felt that his luck was pretty good because he could constantly find monocolored and dual-colored divine lotuses to refine. He faintly felt that this might have something to do with the large number of these two divine lotuses. Furthermore, after the Spiritas entered, they would definitely prioritize searching for divine lotuses of higher quality. If they could not refine the higher quality ones, they would settle for the lower quality ones. At present, the lotus pond had only been open for 4 to 6 hours. The Spiritas were probably staring at the divine lotus above the three-colored lotus. Naturally, no one would pay attention to the single-colored and double-colored lotuses. He didn't mind, and he didn't reject anyone who came. Occasionally, he would encounter Spiritas who were fighting over a three-colored or four-colored divine lotus. Lu Yi didn't participate in the fight because according to this efficiency, even if he only refined the mono and double-colored lotuses, he would be able to obtain a five-colored divine lotus in less than 3 days. Naturally, there was no need for him to compete with the other Spiritas for the three- and four-colored ones. If he encountered it, he could refine it as he pleased. However, as a guest, it was not good to snatch the master's opportunity. In a situation where his luck was good, the four-colored divine lotus in his spirit sea evolved very smoothly. Another 4 hours later, after Lu Yi refined the last three-colored divine lotus he encountered, he immediately sensed that the divine lotus in his spirit sea had undergone an obvious change. Calmly observing, the divine lotus in his spirit sea had indeed turned into a five-colored divine lotus. Silently perceiving it, he found that the five-colored divine lotus effects were several times stronger than the four-colored ones. His soul force could clearly grow as it was nourished by the divine lotus. It was a success. But then again, his experience was a bit strange. According to Li Shang, the Spiritas could only refine one divine lotus. It was impossible for them to refine a second one. But how many had he refined? Moreover, as he refined them, the divine lotus continued to evolve and grow in his spirit sea. This was clearly abnormal. The Spiritas definitely couldn't do such a thing, otherwise Li Shang would have told him. So why was this? Was there something strange about the first two-colored divine lotus he refined, or was it because of some other reason? He also recalled that since ancient times, besides Saint Beasts, there had never been a body of flesh and blood that could enter the Spiritas' ancestral land. The reason he was able to enter was most likely because of his talent tree. This was because when Lu Yi was wrapped up in that strange divine lotus, he had clearly sensed that his talent tree had resonated with it. Then, was it also because of his talent tree that he could constantly refine the divine lotus and make it evolve? But he hadn't sensed any reaction from the talent tree during this process. In other words, during the process of the divine lotus evolving, the talent tree hadn't played any role. This was very strange. Since he couldn't figure it out, he couldn't rashly inquire about it. Now that the five-colored divine lotus was in his hands, Lu Yi prepared to refine the pond water with peace of mind. But just as he was about to do so, another three-colored divine lotus bloomed beside him. It was clearly a newly bred three-colored divine lotus. Above the lotus pond, seeing the busy Lu Yi finally come to a stop, the Spiritas' disciples all breathed a sigh of relief. It hadn't even been a day. Just how many divine lotuses had this boy refined? They couldn't even begin to count. There were at least several hundred of them. As for those single and two-colored divine lotuses, the Spiritas didn't care for them at all. But he had also refined some three-colored and four-colored divine lotuses. This was truly heartbreaking. Although they didn't know why this human had the idea of settling down, this was still a good thing for the other Spiritas. The elders were truly afraid that this human would continue to refine the divine lotuses. If all the divine lotuses in the lotus pond were refined away by him, then no one else would be able to obtain anything. That would truly be a sin. Of course, it was impossible for them to obtain nothing. There were already Spiritas that had refined their own divine lotuses. It was just that there weren't many of them. There were even more Spiritas that were still waiting and watching, wanting to find higher quality divine lotuses. No matter what, it was best if this human boy could settle down and not run around randomly. However, Just as this thought rose up in the elders' minds, they saw that Lu Yi, who had shown signs of settling down, had actually refined another three-colored divine lotus that had appeared near him. Seeing this, the elders couldn't help but sigh. They felt that with the opening of the lotus pond this time, the cultivators of their race wouldn't be able to obtain many benefits. Within the lotus pond, Lu Ye's expression was extremely strange. This was because he discovered that even though his divine lotus had become five-colored, he could still continue to refine it. Moreover, after refining it, the five-colored divine lotus had also undergone some changes. This made him realize one thing very quickly. The five-colored divine lotus was not the end. The reason he felt that five-colored divine lotus was the highest quality was completely because of his preconceived notions. This was because Li Shang had said that the highest quality divine lotus born from the lotus pond was five-colored. Now, it seemed that Li Shang's words were correct, but his understanding was wrong. The five-colored divine lotus could still continue to evolve. If he continued to refine it, would it evolve into a six-colored divine lotus, seven-colored divine lotus, or even a higher quality one? Thinking of this, Lu Yi felt that he had suffered a great loss. Previously, he had encountered some three-colored and four-colored divine lotuses. But because the Spiritas were fighting over them, he didn't participate. This was because he was certain that he could obtain a five-colored divine lotus within 3 days. If he had known that five-colored divine lotus wasn't the end, he wouldn't have let go of those three-colored and four-colored ones. At this time, how could he have any awareness of being a guest? A fortuitous opportunity was hard to come by. It would be too much of a pity to miss it. He originally thought that 3 days was more than enough, but now it seemed that time was tight. He immediately turned around and searched in the direction he came from, because there was a four-colored divine lotus over there. There were 3 Spiritas fighting over it. That four-colored divine lotus was surnamed Lu. Soon, Lu Yi arrived at the location of that four-colored divine lotus. Focusing his eyes and looking over, four-colored light bloomed. The surrounding soul force undulated incessantly. Clearly, the fight hadn't ended yet. Furthermore, it wasn't 3 Spiritas who were fighting. There were only 2 left. There should be 1 Spiritas who knew that he was no match and took the initiative to retreat. At this very moment, the 2 Spiritas who were fighting were both late-stage constellation realm cultivators. However, the fight between the Spiritas was different from the fight between ordinary cultivators. This was because their bodies weren't made of flesh and blood. Hence, their means of fighting were mainly soul mystic arts. All kinds of divine soul mystic arts were displayed. The momentum rumbled, and soul forces constantly collided and fluctuated. It was quite extraordinary. In such a battle, the side with weaker soul force would easily be at a disadvantage. Furthermore, because they were in the lotus pond, they were surrounded by pure soul force that could easily replenish their soul force. Therefore, once the difference in strength between the 2 sides was not too great, it would be very difficult to determine a victor in a battle. This was also the reason why the 2 Spiritas had not decided who the divine lotus belonged to until now. Both of them knew that a long delay meant trouble. After all, with the four-colored divine lotus blooming and them fighting endlessly, it was very likely that it would attract the covetous eyes of other races. At that time, the situation would be even more complicated. The 2 Spiritas had already discussed and reached an agreement. That was, they would join forces. If one side could successfully refine this divine lotus, then they would protect the other side to search for another four-colored divine lotus or even five-colored divine lotus. Although the agreement was reached, they couldn't agree on who would try to refine it first. At this moment, Lu Yi charged over. When the 2 Spiritas saw this, they looked at each other and unexpectedly abandoned the other. Soul force surged and they attacked Lu Yi. Obviously, they planned to drive Lu Yi away first. The Spiritas' secret techniques were very similar to spells, but the source of power for spells was spirit power, while the Spiritas' secret techniques were soul force. Although the appearance was similar, the essence was different. The Spiritas themselves specialized in the power of the soul. When 2 late-stage star mansions joined forces, it was impossible for ordinary star mansions to block. But Lu Yi didn't care and charged straight in the direction of the four-colored divine lotus. At the same time, his divine sense surged, outlining complex runes in front of him. In the blink of an eye, an oval-shaped barrier formed purely from soul force appeared in front of him. Holy Guard. The Holy Guard deduced by the talent tree was a spirit rune activated by spirit power, and when activated by soul force, it was a divine rune. Not just the Holy Guard, Lu Yi had tried other deduced spirit runes. Most of them could be activated by soul force. In other words, these deduced spirit runes were both spirit runes and divine runes. It was just that Lu Yi had never had the chance to use these divine runes. End of this chapter. Chapter 1661. Under the protection of the Holy Guard, Lu Yi ignored the secret techniques of the two Spiritas and went straight for them. The two Spiritas were startled because they had never seen such a strange spirit technique before. Although it was strange, they could still see that it was a defensive spirit technique. With the two of them working together, under the premise that they were of the same realm, the other party would not be able to block them. They would definitely be stopped and might even be injured. However, when their spirit technique hit the Holy Guard's barrier, an unbelievable scene occurred. The barrier only shook slightly, but it was not damaged at all. Then, Lu Yi passed through the middle of them. In terms of pure soul, under the premise that they were of the same realm, Lu Yi could not compare to the Spiritas. After all, the Spiritas were spirit bodies and focused on spirit body cultivation. This was something that no other race could compare to. However, because of Lu Yi's cultivation, he had used many treasures to strengthen his soul. In the early years, he used the soul cleansing water, and in the recent years, he started using the soul refining grass. All of them were items that could nourish and strengthen the soul. Especially the soul refining grass, its effects on the soul were outstanding. When Lu Yi was training in the internal space of the Ho, his soul was injured repeatedly, and he had to rely on the soul refining grass to recover. In this cycle of injury and recovery, one's divine soul would naturally become stronger. It could be said that Lu Yi's current soul strength might not be comparable to the Spiritas, but it was not something that any other race could compare to. Furthermore, in a battle of souls, it was not only the strength of the soul, but also the use of secret techniques. The Spiritas' secret techniques were exquisite, but how could the Holy Guard derived from the talent tree be weak? At this moment, it was condensed and outlined by Lu Yi's spirit power. Under the premise of one attack, the Spiritas of the same realm could forget about breaking it. The two Spiritas were shocked on the spot, their eyes wide open. They secretly suspected that Lu Yi had used some kind of defensive spirit treasure? Otherwise, how could the barrier be so tough? Don't even think about it. Seeing Lu Yi rapidly approaching the four-colored divine lotus, the two Spiritas finally reacted. With a furious shout, they hurriedly chased after him. But just as they moved, Lu Yi had already brushed past the four-colored god lotus. At the same time, the four-colored light rays disappeared. The Spiritas who were about to give chase could not help but stop in their tracks. They looked at Lu Yi's figure in shock and did not react for a long time. Where was the four-colored god lotus? Where did the four-colored divine lotus that they had been fighting over go? Please don't say that it was refined by that person just now. They didn't see the other party refining it at all. It should be known that refining the four-colored divine lotus wasn't something that could be done in a short period of time. No matter how fast it would still take an incense stick's worth of time. But what was the situation now? That person had only flashed past the four-colored divine lotus, and the divine lotus had actually disappeared. Above the lotus pond, Elder Su Yuan had a headache. He didn't know what was going on with Lu Yi, but there seemed to be a change in his attitude. This was because whenever he encountered a conflict between the Spiritas, he would avoid them as much as possible. But now, he had taken the initiative to intervene and even snatch away the four-colored divine lotus. The speed at which this human brat refined the divine lotus was unbelievably fast. At this rate, the Soul Race clansmen had no chance of competing at all. With the opening of the lotus pond this time, the clansmen of the clan probably wouldn't be able to obtain much benefits. At this time, Lu Yi was observing the 5-colored divine lotus in the divine sea. After refining another 4-colored divine lotus, the 5-colored divine lotus changed even more. Lu Yi was completely sure that the 5-colored divine lotus wasn't the end. It still had the potential to evolve into a 6-colored divine lotus. This made him excited. The 5-colored divine lotus's divine soul nourishing effect was already very powerful, so what would a higher quality one be like? He originally thought that 3 days would be more than enough time, but now it seemed that it might not be enough. After all, the higher the quality of the divine lotus, the more divine lotuses would need to be refined during the evolution process. Moreover, the number would increase exponentially. What should he do? After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi thought of an idea. However, whether it would work or not still needed to be verified. If it worked, then things would be much easier. First, he had to find a target to verify. Lu Yi looked around and soon found a monochromatic divine lotus that no one cared about. Standing in front of this single-colored divine lotus, Lu Yi wasn't in a hurry to refine it. With a flick of his finger, a drop of treasure blood flew out. The drop of treasure blood immediately bloomed with a dark red light. When the light dissipated, the treasure blood clone appeared. Then, the treasure blood clone's divine sense surged and quickly refined the single-colored divine lotus. After the treasure blood clone refined the divine lotus, Lu Yi took back the treasure blood clone. At the same time, he carefully observed the changes in the 5-colored divine lotus in the divine sense sea. An inexplicable force was injected into the 5-colored divine lotus, causing it to undergo an almost imperceptible change. It really worked. The treasure blood clone was similar to the talent tree clone. It could be said that it had basically inherited all the characteristics of Lu Ye's original body. Of course, because the power contained in the clone was limited, it was not suitable for a long battle. Moreover, compared to the talent tree clone, the treasure blood clone was far from the original body. However, although this lotus pond was big, it was not big enough to make the treasure blood clone lose contact with the original body. Therefore, Lu Yi could completely let the treasure blood clone move freely in this lotus pond. If 3 days were not enough for him to do it alone, then he would have a few more. Now that he had 3 drops of treasure blood in his body, in other words, he could create 3 treasure blood clones. If he wanted, he could also create a talent tree clone. Of course, this was the territory of the soul race after all. Lu Yi was not sure if the Sunshine Realm experts of the soul race were paying attention to him. The treasure blood clone was fine, but it was not good to expose the talent tree clone. After all, the process of condensing a talent tree clone was different from the treasure blood clone. 3 treasure blood clones and the original body, 4 of him, should be enough, right? Disperse. In front of the 3 treasure blood clones, Lu Yi waved his hand and immediately turned into 4 streams of light, rushing in 4 directions. This Elder Sunshine of the soul race was stunned. Originally, Lu Ye's efficiency in refining the divine lotus was extremely amazing. In just half a day, he had refined countless divine lotuses. But since the will of the ancestral land had passed down the order to take good care of him, the Elder's Sunshine had let him go. But what was the situation now? Was this human boy addicted to the taste of the divine lotus? He was not satisfied with refining the divine lotus alone, so he created 3 clones? And these 3 clones, even from the perspective of the Sunshine Sect cultivators, it was extremely mysterious. They didn't even know what kind of secret technique it was to be able to create 3 clones that looked so real in such a short period of time. Patriarch, a Sunshine Realm expert who looked like a beautiful woman, turned to look at Hun Kei with a resentful expression. This is too much. Patriarch, why don't you do something about it? Hun Kei originally thought that even if the human boy benefited greatly from the opening of the lotus pond this time, the soul race would also benefit greatly from it. But if the situation continued to develop like this, wouldn't it be a situation where the human boy would eat the meat while the soul race would have to drink the soup? In fact, if that human brat had done something even more outrageous, the soul race clansmen might not have even gotten a single drop of soup. Even though Hun Kei had lived for many years, he still had a headache when faced with this situation. Do something about it? How? The will of the ancestral land had already passed down the order. The lotus pond opened early because of Lu Ye's arrival. Should they forcibly take him out of the lotus pond at this time? Didn't they see how the divine lotuses were easily refined the moment his divine thought touched them? Those divine lotuses were all clones of the will of the ancestral land. If the will of the ancestral land did not allow him to refine them, how could it be so easy? If they really forcibly took him out of the lotus pond, wouldn't they be going against the will of the ancestral land? Would he still be the patriarch? Would the soul race still survive here? For a moment, Hun Ke had mixed feelings. The soul race had always claimed that they were the people of the ancestral land and were protected by the ancestral land. Even during the Great War that swept through the universe in the ancient times, they were safe and sound. But now, Hun Ke realized that Lu Yi, who was born as a human, was the real son. The soul race were all illegitimate children. It's not a big problem. Let's wait and see. Hun Ke said calmly, the corners of his eyes twitching. Lu Yi moved quickly. Wherever his main body and 3 clones went, all the divine lotuses were refined. They had a great harvest in one day. On the main body side, the 5-colored divine lotus was already showing signs of evolving into a 6-colored divine lotus. It was estimated that after refining 2 or 3 more 3-colored divine lotuses, it would be enough. The progress of the 3 clones was almost the same. The divine lotuses they refined were all evolving into 5-colored divine lotuses, but they were still at the 4-colored level. Lu Yi wanted to find a 5-colored divine lotus. Because in this kind of refining, he could clearly feel that a ready-made 5-colored divine lotus was equivalent to half a day's effort. Unfortunately, the highest divine lotus he had found so far was only 4-colored. He did not know if 5-colored divine lotuses had not appeared yet or had been refined by the soul race. The number of active soul race members he could encounter was also decreasing. This was because the soul race members who had a harvest would not refine divine lotuses anymore. Instead, they would find a place to refine the pond water here to cultivate and strengthen their soul bodies. Therefore, many of the soul race members Lu Yi encountered would quietly stay in one place, closing their eyes and sitting cross-legged. Even for the soul race members, the opening of the lotus pond was a rare opportunity. At a certain moment, Lu Yi, who was looking around, suddenly turned his head and looked in a direction. In that direction, one of the blood clones had found something. It was exactly what he had been looking for. In the next moment, the void spirit runes around his body outlined, and he disappeared in an instant. When he reappeared, he was already beside the blood clone. The clone did not stop and rushed into the distance, while Lu Ye's main body looked forward. In that direction, several soul powers were colliding and fluctuating. In the center of the collision, there was a 5-colored light blooming. He had finally found the 5-colored divine lotus, and several soul race members were fighting over it. Lu Yi was familiar with this scene, so he immediately moved closer to the battlefield without hesitation. Seeing his actions, the few elders from the soul tribe felt their hearts turn cold. If there were no accidents, the 5-colored god lotus would be surnamed Lu again. End of this chapter. Chapter 1662. As Lu Yi got closer, he actually discovered a familiar aura. Li Shang was here too. Speaking of which, he did not find any trace of Li Shang after entering the lotus pond. He did not expect to meet her here. Taking a closer look, there were a total of 4 spiritlings, including Li Shang, and all of them were late-stage constellation realm. Their strength was similar to Li Shang's. If it was a chaotic battle, who knew how long it would take for the 4 spiritlings to decide the victor? But the current situation was disadvantageous to Li Shang, because the 3 spiritlings did not care about martial ethics and actually teamed up to deal with her. Obviously, they planned to eliminate Li Shang first, and then fight the remaining 3. This was a normal method for the spiritlings when they encountered a high-quality god lotus, but it was unknown if the 3 spiritlings had teamed up at the last minute or had already formed an alliance. When Lu Yi arrived, Li Shang already had thoughts of retreating. After all, it was 1 against 3, everyone knew each other's strength, how could she be their opponent? Forcefully staying behind was just asking for trouble. Just as she made up her mind, she unexpectedly sensed a familiar aura approaching. She quickly turned her head to look, and actually saw Lu Ye's figure. She calmed down. Others did not know of Lu Ye's strength, but she knew, after all, she had possessed Lu Ye many times to fight with Yu Yao, and a few Yu Yao had died at Lu Ye's hands, even Ri Zhao had won. But the spiritlings' fights were not the same as normal fights. Although Lu Ye was strong, she did not know if he could gain any advantage in such a fight. Just as she was thinking, Lu Ye had already made his move, spirit power surged, complex veined patterns spread out. In a blink of an eye, a short blade without a handle appeared and attacked one of the spiritlings. Godage. The Holy Guardian used his soul power to activate it, and it didn't appear to be much different from using his spirit power. It was a protective barrier. But the God Edge was not the same. If it was constructed with spirit power, it would be attached to the blade, greatly increasing the sharpness of the weapon. If it was constructed with spirit power, it would appear as a sharp blade. Of course, if there was a suitable spirit treasure, it could be added to the spirit treasure, but Lu Ye did not have any spirit treasures that could attack. At first glance, the sharpness was like a short blade without a handle. It tore through the water and instantly arrived in front of a soul. The soul sensed that something was amiss and immediately urged his soul power to protect his body. However, he soon revealed a horrified expression. This was because even with his late-stage Constellation Realm Foundation, the defense he condensed was so weak that it could not even withstand a single blow from the sharpness. Then, the dazzling light pierced through his body. The Spirida's cultivator cried out in alarm and hastily retreated. If it were a body of flesh and blood that suffered such an attack, blood would definitely splatter everywhere. However, the soul race was ultimately a soul body. Therefore, such a bloody scene did not appear. Such injuries were neither serious nor minor for the soul race. Normally, it would not be difficult for them to recover, let alone now that they were in the Lotus Pond. With the surrounding pond water as support, recovery was much easier. But the Spirida's cultivator revealed a look of horror. Although it was only a single strike, he could already feel just how terrifying Lu Ye's attack was. It wasn't something he could block. Luckily, he had two temporary allies. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, his expression turned sluggish. At the same time, his two dying allies also froze, not daring to move. Under the gazes of three pairs of eyes, Lu Ye quietly stood not too far away. Soul power surged around his body and sharp objects began to rapidly form around him. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of sharp divine runes had appeared around Lu Ye, firmly locking onto the three Spirida's cultivators. The three Spirida's cultivators could clearly sense that as long as they dared to move, they would inevitably welcome Lu Ye's barrage of attacks. After witnessing the ferocity of this attack with their own eyes, how could they not know just how terrifying these divine runes were? If they were struck by so many divine runes at once, it wouldn't be as simple as just being injured. Luckily, the other party had no intention of launching an attack. They were likely only here to deter them. As their eyes met, the three Spirida's cultivators tactfully shook their heads and left. If they weren't Lu Ye's match, there was no point in forcing themselves to stay. Moreover, when the Spiridas fought, they would stop at a certain point. It was rare for a decisive battle to occur. What kind of soul technique is this? Above the lotus pond, Elder Su Yuan rubbed his eyes hard and asked in shock. The other elders also had looks of disbelief on their faces. They really wanted to know what this was. They all knew that Lu Ye was a human, but for a human to be able to cultivate such an exquisite soul technique, it was simply too inconceivable. Although Lu Ye had displayed the Holy Guard technique before, this was the first time he used divine runes. For a moment, the elders of the Spiridas were shocked. This was because the speed of the divine runes was too fast. It shouldn't be an ability that a constellation cultivator should have. Moreover, its killing power was incomparably terrifying. The Spiridas of the same realm couldn't block it at all. The Spirida's expression was grave as he slowly said, "This shouldn't be a soul technique." "It's not a soul technique?" The elders of the Spiridas were shocked. Han Ke said, "There's a type of people from the other races called Spirit Rune Masters. Spirit Rune Masters have a branch called Battle Rune Masters. They're good at using all kinds of spirit runes to increase their strength in battle. Their fighting style is unpredictable and very difficult to deal with. What this kid used should be a Battle Rune Master's technique. Moreover, those should be divine runes. Divine runes. The elders of the Spiritas were deep in thought. They had naturally heard of divine runes. Many soul techniques of the Spiritas even had traces of divine runes. However, this was the first time they had seen such exaggerated divine runes. It wasn't about the power. No matter how strong a constellation cultivator's technique was, it was nothing to them. However, the speed at which the divine runes were activated was too unbelievable. Hundreds of divine runes were activated in a single thought. Was this something a human could do? Damn it. The matron elder sighed. From the looks of it, the first 5-colored god lotus was going to fall into the hands of this human kid. 3 or 4-colored god lotus was one thing, but this was 5-colored god lotus. The Spiritas who could refine the 5-colored god lotus were all talented in the Spiritas. Although they might not be able to become as Spiritas, they had more hope than other people. It had been too long since a new Spiritas was born in the ancestral land. With only the support of the older generation, the future was bleak. Congratulations, fellow cultivator. After the 3 Spiritas left, Li Shang turned to look at Lu Yi with a slightly complicated expression. Although she knew that Lu Yi was very strong, she didn't expect Lu Yi to still be able to suppress cultivators of the same level in such a battle. This was something she had never seen before. Congratulations should be the one. Lu Yi looked at Li Shang. Question mark. Li Shang didn't understand. I've already refined the god lotus, Lu Yi said with a smile. Li Shang was stunned for a moment. Then she looked happy. Really? Why would I lie to you? Lu Yi raised her hand as she spoke. Suddenly, a 5-colored god lotus appeared on her hand. Normally, divine lotuses were in the divine sea, but they could be summoned. However, they were only used to nourish the soul. They had no offensive or defensive abilities, so summoning them was useless. Seeing the 5-colored god lotus, Li Shang immediately believed Lu Ye's words. She said in surprise, "Then I'll go refine it." "I'll protect you," Lu Yi said. If Li Shang wasn't here, he wouldn't have let go of this 5-colored god lotus. After all, refining a 5-colored god lotus was equivalent to half a day's effort. He could definitely make the divine lotuses he already had evolved to 6 colors. But since Li Shang was here, there was no harm in letting her try. Over the past few years, Li Shang had helped him a lot. If it weren't for Li Shang's possession, Lu Yi estimated that he wouldn't have been able to kill Yu Yao with his own strength. Moreover, the ancestors of Immortal Essence City would need Li Shang's care in the future. Yi and Hupa would also stay here. There was no harm in letting Li Shang become stronger. Of course, whether Li Shang could successfully refine Lu Yi couldn't be determined. If she couldn't, it wouldn't be too late for him to make a move. Li Shang looked excited as she approached the 5-colored god lotus. She felt a little unreal. Although she also wanted to refine a 5-colored god lotus, she knew that it would be difficult. Since ancient times, there hadn't been many people who could refine a 5-colored god lotus. Although a 5-colored god lotus would appear every time the lotus pond opened, there might not be anyone who could refine it. She just wanted to give it a try. If it didn't work, she would refine a 4-colored one. If it still didn't work, then she would refine a 3-colored one. If that still didn't work, then she would refine a single 2-colored one. Lu Yi had never seen a Soul Tribe member refine a divine lotus. As she watched, Li Shang, who was standing in front of the 5-colored god lotus, surged with soul power, enveloping the divine lotus. Soon, the 5-colored god lotus reacted. Its petals gently opened, like the wings of a butterfly fluttering. Li Shang's expression was slightly excited. Her soul power surged even more intensely. In the next instant, the 5-colored god lotus turned into a 5-colored stream of light, imprinted into her body, and disappeared. Li Shang, who hadn't even begun to use her power, was stunned. "Congratulations, fellow Taoist." Lu Yi congratulated. Li Shang hadn't reacted yet. It wasn't until he repeatedly confirmed that the 5-colored god lotus had really been refined into his body that he revealed an excited smile. However, refining a divine lotus shouldn't be so simple, right? Although it was Li Shang's first time participating in the lotus pond competition, she also knew the difficulty of refining a 5-colored god lotus. Logically speaking, even if she had the qualifications to refine it, it would take at least an hour. How did she succeed in an instant? Furthermore, why do I feel that our 2 divine lotuses are a little different? Li Shang asked. The 5-colored god lotus that Lu Yi displayed just now seemed to be a little more resplendent than the one she refined. The color was also a little richer. Although she didn't carefully compare, Li Shang felt that the 2 divine lotuses were quite different. No, maybe the colors are different, Lu Yi said casually. Li Shang didn't ask any more. Having just refined the 5-colored god lotus, she was still very excited. She said, although I've refined the divine lotus, there's still some time before the lotus pond closes. The cultivation environment here is rare. Fellow Taoist, please don't waste it. Why don't you cultivate here together? Today, I'll take the child to the hospital again. Because it's out of town, I have to go there early. If everything goes well, I'll be hospitalized tomorrow and have the surgery the day after tomorrow. If I don't do my best, please forgive me. I hope everything goes well. End of chapter. Chapter 1663. What's going on? The elders of the soul race Rizhao were all stunned, feeling that today's events were too strange. That human Luye was able to quickly refine the divine lotus thanks to the ancestral land's will, so how could Li Shang be able to do the same? Moreover, it was a 5-colored divine lotus, the highest quality divine lotus in the lotus pond. Logically speaking, even if Li Shang could refine it, it would take him at least half an hour to do so, but in fact, Li Shang only spent a few breaths of time. Compared to the efficiency of the other clansmen, this was simply terrifying. One had to know that in their eyes, the other clansmen were refining divine lotuses at a normal speed and efficiency. This was obviously not normal. Li Shang being able to do this was definitely because of that human boy. The ancestral lands will had taken special care of him, allowing him to refine so many divine lotuses without any effort. He even gave the 5-colored divine lotus to Li Shang, and as a result, even Li Shang was able to enjoy such treatment. This boy is not bad. The woman who had just thought Lu Yi was disgusting couldn't help feeling that he was much more pleasing to the eye. Although he had refined many divine lotuses, causing the soul race to lose some opportunities, allowing Li Shang to refine a 5-colored divine lotus was enough to make up for everything. Not every time the lotus pond opened, a soul race clansman would be lucky enough to refine a 5-colored divine lotus. Often, 10 times the lotus pond opened, only one clansman would succeed. Take this time for example, the Rizhao clan didn't expect any of their clansmen to be able to refine a 5-colored divine lotus, but now that Li Shang had appeared, it was absolutely a pleasant surprise. With the help of this 5-colored divine lotus, Li Shang could be said to have the qualifications to become a Rizhao clan disciple and would be worth cultivating in the future. This old master wants to know one thing. Su Yuan rubbed his aching head. Where did he get the 5-colored divine lotus? As soon as these words came out, many of the soul race Rizhao clan disciples couldn't help being stunned. That's right, where did he get the 5-colored divine lotus? After the lotus pond opened this time, Li Shang's 5-colored lotus was the first to be born. Although Lu Yi had refined a lot of divine lotuses before, but the highest number he had refined was only 4-colored, and most of them were single or double-colored. How could he have a 5-colored divine lotus? But he had clearly just summoned a 5-colored divine lotus. Moreover, Li Shang's 5 divine lotus was different from his own. How could the Rizhao clan elders? Lu Ye's 5-colored divine lotus was abnormal. Whether it was the color or the brightness, it was vastly different from the 5-colored divine lotus that they knew. Thinking back to his previous actions, an unbelievable thought suddenly popped up in the minds of the elders. The woman revealed a shocked expression and turned to look at Hun Quebec, patriarch, Could it be? Hun Kei shook his head slowly. He did not mean to deny it, but he did not know either. The Spiritas had lived here for tens of thousands of years, and he had been in control of the Spiritas for thousands of years. But in his entire life, he had never seen as many strange and wondrous things as today. It was truly an eye-opening experience. After the lotus pond closes, we'll be able to find out by asking. Normally, the sunshine wouldn't bother to pry into other people's secrets, but Lu Ye's five-colored god lotus made them curious. If they didn't figure it out, the Spiritas' sunshine wouldn't be able to cultivate properly in the future. In the lotus pond, Lu Yi rejected Li Shang's invitation. After the Spiritas refined a divine lotus, he was naturally free of worries. He could cultivate here in peace until the lotus pond closed, but he still had work to do. The three precious blood clones weren't idle, so his original body naturally couldn't slack off. He explained to Li Shang that he wanted to look around, and Li Shang naturally wouldn't stop him. After bidding farewell to Li Shang, Lu Yi continued to search for and refine the divine lotus. More than 4 hours later, Lu Yi looked at the divine lotus in his spirit sea. After 4 hours of hard work, the five-colored divine lotus had turned into a six-colored divine lotus. Moreover, he could continue to refine the divine lotus. It was obvious that it could evolve into a seven-colored divine lotus. This made Lu Yi extremely excited. The six-colored divine lotus nourishing effect on the divine soul was much better than the five-colored divine lotus. If it could evolve into a seven-colored divine lotus, it would definitely be stronger. Sensing the progress of the three precious blood clones, Lu Yi felt that there was still a big gap between him and the seven-colored divine lotus. He had to work harder. Calculating the time, the lotus pond would close in a day. However, there was good news. One of the precious blood clones found another five-colored divine lotus, and Lu Ye's original body hurried over. Although the precious blood clones had inherited all of Lu Ye's strength, as long as they had suitable weapons, they could almost display his normal strength. However, because they were precious blood clones, they were different from the talent tree clones. Precious blood clones couldn't quickly activate the divine runes. In such a competitive environment, the divine runes were the key to fighting the enemy, so only the original body could take action. The powerful killing power of the divine blade divine runes was not something that the Spiritas of the same realm could resist. The original body only showed a little of its means, and it made the Spiritas who were fighting for the five-colored divine lotus retreat. The situation was almost the same as when he encountered Li Shang. After refining this five-colored divine lotus, he would be one step closer to the seven-colored divine lotus. When there was only half a day left before the lotus pond closed, Lu Yi was the only one left in the entire lotus pond. The other Spiritas had either refined the divine lotus and didn't have any desires, so they used this special environment to cultivate. Or they didn't gain anything and knew that they couldn't refine any divine lotus, so they didn't waste time and used this place to cultivate. This made it even more convenient for Lu Yi. Even though he had been refining the divine lotus for the past few days, there were still single-colored and double-colored divine lotuses in the lotus pond. After being refined by him, they turned into nutrients for the divine lotus in his divine sea. He secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, he had the precious blood clones. Otherwise, with the original body alone, he definitely wouldn't have enough time. Until a certain moment, a voice suddenly sounded in the ears of everyone in the lotus pond. After an incense stick of time, the lotus pond will close. All clansmen must leave quickly. This was obviously the Spiritas' powerhouse informing the clansmen so that they wouldn't come out too late and something unexpected would happen. For a time, in the entire lotus pond, many Spiritas flew up. Lu Yi also stopped his busy figure. Time was up. He didn't know if he could obtain a seven-colored divine lotus by combining the divine lotuses of his original body and the three precious blood clones, but he estimated that it wouldn't be too much of a problem. This was because not only did his original body have a six-colored divine lotus, but one of the precious blood clones also had a six-colored divine lotus. Although the other two precious blood clones only had five-colored divine lotuses, whether they were six-colored or five-colored, they weren't in a newly evolved state. Rather, they had refined many more divine lotuses on the basis of their evolved state. If these 4 divine lotuses were combined, there was a high probability that they could evolve into a 7-colored divine lotus, right? Of course, if it didn't work, then there was nothing Lu Yi could do. He couldn't just stay here. Whether it was 6-colored or 7-colored, this was a pleasant surprise. Before coming to the Spirida's ancestral land, he hadn't expected to obtain such a benefit. Now that he had it, he didn't need to be too demanding. As the spiritual power around his body surged, a void spirit inscription appeared under his feet. In the next moment, the 3 precious blood clones teleported from 3 different directions and disappeared into Lu Ye's body one by one. Lu Yi didn't stop and rushed up. At the same time, he could clearly feel that some wonderful changes were taking place in his spirit sea. Under close attention, he saw that the original 6-colored divine lotus in his spirit sea, after fusing with the divine lotuses brought back by the 3 precious blood clones, quickly evolved into a 7-colored divine lotus. For a time, multicolored light bloomed in his spirit sea, covering all corners. At this moment, Lu Ye's mind couldn't help but feel a sense of clarity that he had never felt before. It was as if he was a pure jade, untainted by even a speck of dust. He could clearly feel that if he comprehended any secret technique or obscure technique in this state, the efficiency would be greatly improved. This was undoubtedly very useful for him, because whether it was comprehending the inheritances left by the many ancestors in the skeleton or deducing spirit inscriptions with the talent tree, he needed such clarity of mind. It could be foreseen that in the future, when he deduced spirit inscriptions or comprehended some inheritances, the efficiency would be greatly increased. In addition, Lu Yi also had a very strange feeling, that was, he seemed to have some wonderful connection with the entire ancestral land. However, before he could understand what this connection was, he had already left the lotus pond. In the next moment, he immediately felt many gazes looking in his direction. Looking up, he saw that the elders of the Spiridas were looking at him with complicated expressions. Lu Yi felt a little guilty. This situation? Could it be that what he did in the lotus pond was seen by them? That must be it, otherwise, why would these elders look at him like this? A loud boom suddenly sounded as the gigantic lotus pond began to tremble. The water in the lotus pond also began to tremble. Following that, under the watchful eyes of many Spiridas, the blooming lotus pond's petals began to close. Soon, it returned to the appearance of a budding flower bud. This time, the competition for the lotus pond was completely over. Hun Kei's voice sounded again. It was nothing more than to encourage the Spiridas who participated in the competition for the lotus pond. He wanted the Spiridas to not be arrogant and to continue working hard, and for the Spiridas who did not gain anything to cultivate and improve themselves, hoping to gain something the next time the lotus pond opened. Not long after, the Soul Race clansmen dispersed. Lu Yi, Li Shang, Yi, and Hu Po also gathered together. Yi was clearly very happy when she learned that Li Shang and Lu Yi had both gained something this time. She also looked forward to the next time she participated in the Lotus Pond battle. The group was about to rush to Li Shang's 5-colored Lotus Land. Lu Yi, don't be in a hurry to leave. Hun Kei suddenly called out to him. Lu Yi turned to look at Hun Kei and saw that the elders of the Spiridas were all looking at him. I'll go over. Senior Hun Kei probably has some instructions. You guys go back first. Lu Yi said. Li Shang nodded, but Yi was a little worried. Are you all right? Lu Yi smiled. I'm fine. If something really happened, he would not be able to avoid it, as there were several elders of the Spiridas here. Li Shang was not worried about the elders of the Spiridas, so he comforted Yi and left with her and Hu Po. Only then did Lu Yi walk to Hun Kei and the other Spiridas, bowing. Greetings, seniors. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.